The night air over the Nile carried a softness that only came when the day's heat had finally grown tired. The mud brick walls of the village still held warmth from the sun, but above them the sky had become dark and wide, scattered with quiet stars. Somewhere beyond the houses, water moved in a slow and patient way, brushing reeds along the riverbank. A dog barked once in the distance, then decided sleep was better. Inside small homes with low ceilings and packed earth floors, families rested close together. Woven mats had been rolled out. Linen cloths were folded beneath heads. Clay lamps burned low, each flame small and careful, making shadows that barely moved. Sandals sat near doorways. Bread baskets waited empty for morning. The smell of grain, dust, smoke, and warm stone lingered in the rooms. This was ancient Egypt, though no one living there called it ancient. To them it was simply the world. It was the place where the river rose and fell, where fields greened and dried, where children were born into houses already full of rules. Long before a child understood the shape of love, they learned the shape of duty. A little boy might wake before sunrise to the sound of his father clearing his throat in the dark. A girl might open her eyes to hear grain being poured into a grinding stone. No one asked if they felt ready for the day. Morning came, and work came with it. The village would stir slowly at first. A rooster somewhere near the edge of the fields. Footsteps crossing a stone threshold. The scrape of a wooden bolt lifted from a door. Then more sounds joined in. Quiet voices. A donkey snorting. Clay jars being moved. A baby crying and then calming against a shoulder. Children learned early that these sounds meant movement. They meant stand up. Wash your face. Carry something. Sweep something. Follow someone older. Do not delay. There were loving parents, of course. There were gentle hands and tired smiles. There were mothers who hummed while kneading dough, fathers who lifted children onto shoulders, grandmothers who tucked blankets into place at night. But tenderness often lived between duties, not instead of them. The day belonged to rules. A child learned where to sit and where not to sit. Which jar held clean water and which held beer for the adults. How close to stand near the oven. Which animals could be trusted and which would bite. How to greet elders. How to lower the eyes when spoken to sharply. How to stay silent when visitors entered. Even play had edges. Children ran in dusty lanes, tossed pebbles, chased each other around walls, shaped little boats from reeds, but always with one ear turned toward home. A call from a doorway could end laughter at once. Come back. Carry this. Watch your brother. Bring water. Grind grain. Gather reeds. The river itself taught rules more sternly than any parent. The Nile gave fish, water, transport, coolness, mud for bricks, and life for the fields. Yet it also carried danger. Children were warned where banks were slippery, where currents pulled strangely, where crocodiles had been seen, where boats tied their ropes, where fishermen did not want little feet under them. A child might stand barefoot in damp soil at dawn, looking across misty water glowing pale gold, hearing birds lift from reeds. It was beautiful. It was calm. It was also a place where one wrong step could bring punishment, fear, or pain. So they learned to admire carefully. In homes of working families, affection was often practical. Food saved for you. A blanket shared. A blister wrapped. A task made lighter when someone took part of the load. Words of open comfort were less common than acts of endurance beside one another. When bread dough was mixed before sunrise, children watched and learned. Flour dust settled on arms and cheeks. Water was poured slowly. Salt added by habit, not measure. The dough pressed and folded under strong hands. Fires were coaxed awake in clay ovens. Heat rose quickly. A girl too young to knead well might still be told to fan the coals. A boy too sleepy to stand straight might still be sent to fetch water. Complaints rarely changed anything. Hunger waited for no one. By midday the heat became heavy enough to press on the shoulders. Stone paths burned feet if sandals were thin. Flies circled baskets and bowls. Men in fields bent over work with cloths wrapped around heads. Women moved through courtyards with jars balanced carefully. Children carried smaller loads, but loads all the same. When tiredness made them slow, they were reminded. Stand straight. Move faster. Do not spill. Listen. Again. These were common words. They fell through the air as often as dust. To grow up meant entering a chain already in motion. Your father had obeyed his father. Your mother had learned from her mother. Older brothers corrected younger ones. Sisters watched sisters. Neighbors noticed everything. No child belonged only to themselves. Even names carried expectation. Some children were named for gods, for hopes, for gratitude, for family memory. Yet no name freed them from labor. In towns larger than villages, the streets were narrower and busier. Workshops lined walls of sun-dried brick. Potters turned wheels with wet hands. Weavers worked looms in rhythmic patience. Carpenters shaved wood in curls that gathered on floors. Metal workers hammered bronze in hot courtyards. Scribes bent over papyrus in shaded rooms. A child of a potter learned clay before softness. Knead it. Keep it wet. Do not waste it. Turn the wheel steady. Carry finished bowls carefully. A child of a scribe might have cleaner hands but stricter days. Sit still. Hold the reed pen properly. Copy symbols again and again. Do not smudge. Do not daydream. Accuracy before comfort. To modern ears that may sound cold, but to many families it sounded like hope. Skill could feed a household. Discipline could raise status. Literacy could spare the back from endless field labor. Rules were not always cruelty. Sometimes they were the road away from harder suffering. Still, roads can be hard even when they lead somewhere good. Imagine a boy in a training room for scribes. Morning light enters through a high opening. Dust drifts in the beam. Other boys sit cross-legged, repeating lines from memory. Their teacher walks slowly with a switch tucked beneath one arm. Ink smells sharp. Reeds scratch. Someone coughs. The boy's hand aches. His stomach is half full. He misses the river breeze outside. He writes a sign poorly and must begin again. No one says, "I know you are tired." They say, "Again." And so he learns that worth may arrive through correction more often than praise. Imagine a girl in a household where weaving never seems to end. Thread catches on fingers. Linen stretches across the loom. Her mother watches closely, not because she enjoys harshness, but because wasted thread means wasted time, and wasted time can mean less food later. The girl wants to rest her shoulders. Her mother notices the slowing pace. "Straighten it," she says. "Pull tighter. Watch the edge." The girl obeys. She learns that care can sound sharp when life is narrow. At night, though, things softened. After the evening meal, after bowls were rinsed and tools stacked and animals checked, people sat closer. The heat left the walls little by little. Some homes shared stories in low voices. Some simply listened to the silence. Some mended sandals by lamp glow. Some massaged sore wrists and swollen feet. Children, finally still, leaned against parents who had been stern all day. A father who barked commands in the field might quietly untangle knots from his daughter's hair. A mother who corrected every mistake at the oven might tuck extra cloth around her sleeping son when desert air cooled. Love existed there. It was simply tired. There were festivals too, and feast days, and moments when rules loosened like knots in wet rope. Music sounded from drums and flutes. Beer flowed more freely. Neighbors laughed louder. Children ran later into evening lanes. Temples filled with offerings. Flowers were worn. Perfume scented wrists and necks. Yet even joy had structure. Processions had order. Offerings had form. Respect had to be shown. Children watched and copied. Because copying was survival. Ancient Egypt admired balance, order, rightness. The river kept a pattern. The stars kept path, seasons returned. Fields flooded and dried. Society reflected this ideal. Everyone had a place, at least in theory. Everyone had duties. Children felt this before they could name it. A son might know he would inherit tools, debts, habits, and expectations. A daughter might know she would inherit skills, burdens, recipes, and rhythms of care. Even those who dreamed strange dreams woke to familiar tasks. Sometimes children resisted quietly. A missing tool hidden in play. A slow walk to the well. A whispered joke during lessons. A handful of figs taken before permission. These were small rebellions in a world where large rebellion was dangerous. Sometimes punishment followed. A sharp word. An extra task. Public embarrassment. A cuff on the shoulder. A teacher's strike on the legs. Such things were common enough to be unremarkable. And because they were common, many accepted them as part of growing. There is a sadness in that, but also a truth found in many ages. People often pass forward what was given to them, especially when survival leaves little room to imagine another way. Yet not every house was stern in the same manner. Some fathers were patient. Some mothers laughed easily. Some grandparents spoiled children with dates or stories. Some older siblings shielded younger ones from blame. Human hearts were varied then as now. Still, the wider current moved toward obedience. When the flood season came and fields disappeared beneath broad shining water, routines changed but rules remained. Boats moved where paths once lay. Men repaired tools. Labor shifted to building and hauling. Children were set to tasks indoors or near shorelines. They watched the river spread across the land like a second sky. It was beautiful enough to quiet anyone. But beauty did not cancel duty. Grain stores had to be counted. Nets mended. Walls patched. Animals tended on higher ground. Officials might pass through recording measures and taxes. Families calculated what they had, what they owed, what might be enough. Children noticed tension even when adults said little. A mother stirring porridge more thinly than before. A father silent longer than usual. Neighbors speaking softly near a doorway. In such times, affection often hid inside firmness. Teach the child now, so the child can endure later. Many believed softness could weaken. Hardship, they thought, prepared the young for a hard world. So boys were sent to lift earlier than needed. Girls were given responsibility before ease had finished with childhood. Tears were hurried away. Fear was named foolishness. Hunger was normal. Weariness was ordinary. And still, children found wonder. They watched ibis birds step through marsh water like careful priests. They traced finger lines in fresh mud after the flood. They listened to storytellers describe gods crossing the sky. They tasted honey on festival days. They felt cool river breeze after burning noon heat. They fell asleep to crickets and distant oars. The human spirit has always made small gardens inside difficult places. As years passed, the rules changed shape. The very young were told where to stand. Older children were told what to carry. Adolescents were told whom to marry, whom to serve, what trade to learn, what behavior brought shame, what obedience brought peace. Choice remained small for many. A young man might wish to travel, yet be needed in fields. A young woman might wish for quiet, yet be promised into another busy household. Personal longing often bowed before family need. And because this was common, it felt natural. That is one of history's quiet powers. What surrounds a person from birth often seems like the way things must be. But late at night, under stars above the Nile, even obedient hearts sometimes wondered. A boy lying awake on a mat might hear river frogs and think of boats heading north. A girl turning on warm linen might imagine a house where no one shouted in the morning. A servant staring through a doorway at moonlight might picture sleeping one full day with no commands spoken. These thoughts left no record. Papyrus favored taxes, prayers, contracts, and names of the important. Yet ordinary longing surely lived in countless silent rooms. Morning always returned. The eastern sky paled behind palms and reeds. Lamps were pinched out. Ashes stirred. Grain ground. Sandals strapped on. Shoulders rolled against stiffness. Children woke not into questions of feeling, but into schedules. And so another day began in the old land by the river, where growing up often meant learning where to place your hands, how to lower your eyes, when to speak, how to endure the heat, how to carry weight, how to obey the rhythm already moving long before you were born. Love was there. But rules were louder. Before the sun showed itself, the village had already begun to breathe again. The sky over the eastern bank was pale gray, then faint blue, then touched with a thin line of gold. Coolness still rested on the ground for a little while longer. The stones of the lane were gentle under bare feet. Palm leaves hardly moved. Somewhere in the reeds, birds spoke in soft bursts and then fell quiet again. Inside the homes, sleep loosened slowly. A child turned on a woven mat and hoped, for one small moment, that morning had forgotten the house. But someone was already awake. Someone always was. A mother kneeling beside a grinding stone. A father tying cloth around his waist. A grandmother blowing into last night's embers until a glow returned. A baby stirring. A goat knocking lightly against a wooden post. Then came the familiar voice. Up now. Not angry. Not warm. Simply certain. Children learned that certainty early. They rose with heavy eyes and stiff arms. The youngest sometimes needed to be lifted to standing. Older ones were expected to move without being told twice. There was little room in the day for lingering. Grain would not grind itself. Water would not carry itself. Dough would not shape itself. Animals would not wait politely. The house itself seemed to know the order of things. Clay jars stood where they always stood. Baskets waited in their corners. Linen hung folded from pegs. A reed broom leaned against the wall. The low oven held yesterday's ash. Every object had a place, and children were expected to remember it. If a cup was misplaced, someone noticed. If a tool was left outside, someone asked why. If grain spilled, someone sighed in a deep tired way that felt heavier than shouting. This too was instruction. Not all rules were spoken aloud. Many lived in glances, pauses, and the look adults gave one another when a child had failed some quiet expectation. A little boy might hurry to fetch water from the lane cistern, eager to show speed, only to slosh half of it onto the ground. He would return proud for one heartbeat, then see the wet trail behind him. Too fast, his father would say. Tomorrow, steady. The boy would nod. He had wanted praise. Instead he received correction wrapped in usefulness. A girl helping shape bread might press the dough unevenly, leaving one loaf thick and another thin. Her mother would take the pieces apart, fold them back together, and place the dough into the child's hands again. Feel it, she would say. Use both palms. Watch the edges. No embrace followed. But the lesson itself was a form of care. In a world where hunger waited close by, teaching well could be tenderness. Outside, the lanes filled little by little. Neighbors crossed paths carrying baskets, hose, nets, bundles of reeds, jars balanced on heads, babies tied against hips. Greetings were brief. The day was long ahead. Dust rose in faint clouds around ankles. Donkeys flicked their ears. Dogs searched for scraps. Children moved among all of it like small workers in training. Some were sent to gather dung for fuel, dry and common, gathered by hand and stored for later fires. Some carried scraps to goats. Some swept courtyards smooth. Some minded younger siblings who toddled dangerously close to everything. To be useful was praised. To be idle was noticed. There were moments of softness hidden in these hours. A mother brushing crumbs from a child's cheek. An uncle slipping a date into a waiting hand. A grandmother laughing when a toddler mispronounced a word. Yet these moments passed quickly, like cool wind before the heat returned. Soon the sun rose higher. With it came brightness that flattened shadows and sharpened edges. White walls gleamed. Roof lines shimmered. The smell of warm mud brick, straw, smoke, and river damp mixed in the air. Men moved toward fields or workshops. Women continued the endless weaving of household tasks. Children followed whichever path family need required. For farming families, seasons ruled nearly everything. When fields needed sowing, children scattered seed with careful throws, learning to spread evenly. When weeds rose, they bent for hours beside elders pulling stubborn roots. When harvest came, they bundled stalks, tied cords, carried sheaves, and coughed in clouds of chaff. Many first memories must have been of bending. The earth close to the face. The smell of wet soil after irrigation. The ache in lower backs before adulthood had even arrived. The call of adults across rows. Straight lines mattered. Timing mattered. Waste mattered. If a child grew distracted by a bird overhead or a beetle in the dirt, the reminder came swiftly. Hands working. Eyes here. Again. Yet fields also gave beauty no one needed to announce. Water channels flashed silver under morning light. Young grain moved like green fur under wind. Egrets stepped through shallows. The broad sky changed color by the hour. Children noticed these things even while laboring. Wonder often survives beside tiredness. In households tied to fishing, mornings began nearer the river. Nets had to be checked for tears. Rope had to be coiled. Small boats pushed from mud banks with careful feet. Boys often learned balance before they learned ease. Girls helped salt fish, mend baskets, prepare bait, carry catch to market, or keep homework moving while others were gone. The Nile smelled of life and silt and reeds and sun-warmed wood. Mist lifted from it in the first light. Oars dipped softly. Then day brightened, and with it came commands. Hold the rope tighter. Watch the current. Sort those fish. Move quicker. Do not waste the good ones. Again, care often wore the face of impatience. Because danger was real. Nets could tangle. Hooks could wound. Boats could tip. Fish spoiled. Crocodiles watched from places that seemed empty. Hippos, broad and calm-looking, could destroy boats and bodies with little warning. Adults who sounded harsh were often speaking against risks too common to explain each time. In towns, children of craftsmen entered other kinds of discipline. A young apprentice in a carpenter's yard woke to the scent of sawdust and resin. Sunlight crossed stacked boards. Tools hung from pegs, adzes, chisels, mallets, cords, drills. The master expected silence at first. Sweep shavings. Sort pegs by size. Bring water. Watch closely. Watching was work. Hands learned after eyes. The boy might long to shape wood himself, to carve a clean line or fit a joint. Instead he spent weeks carrying, fetching, holding, repeating. Skill came slowly, through patience enforced from outside until it grew inside. A girl in a weaving room might sit for hours amid the soft scrape of thread through fingers and the gentle knock of loom bars. Dust motes turned in shafts of light. Older women spoke little when concentrating. Mistakes meant unraveling, and unraveling meant lost time. Keep tension even. Count the rows. Do not knot lazily. Sit straighter. She learned that beauty often began as posture. Children born into wealthier homes lived differently, but not always freely. Servants handled much labor, yet expectation could be stricter. Manners were observed closely. Speech corrected. Cleanliness maintained. Instruction in letters, religion, etiquette, and household management could be constant. A rich child might not carry water, but still carry pressure. Do not embarrass the family. Do not speak crudely. Do not eat before elders. Do not stain linen. Do not be foolish before guests. Rules change clothing more easily than nature. By midday, all classes felt the heat. It settled over roofs and courtyards like another roof above them. Animals sought shade. Workers slowed where possible. Children drooped where they stood. Clay cups warmed quickly in the hand. Sweat gathered behind knees, underarms, along backs. The scent of hot stone rose from lanes. Meals at noon were plain and practical. Bread, onions, beans, dried fish, figs when lucky, beer watered enough for daily use. Families ate where they could. Some under awnings. Some beside walls that offered a ribbon of shade. Some standing between tasks. Children learned another rule here. Eat what is given. Eat before flies do. Eat before returning to work. No one waited for appetite to become poetic. Then came the long afternoon, often the hardest part of the day. Morning still carries hope. Evening carries relief. Afternoon carries only duration. This was when children felt time stretch. The basket still half full. The grain still unground. The thread still unfinished. The goat still restless. The younger sibling still crying. The sun still hot. Adults felt it too, though they had practice hiding it. A father whose shoulders burned from hauling stone might snap more quickly at a careless child. A mother with cracked hands from washing and kneading might speak sharply over a dropped bowl. Fatigue often travels through the voice before it reaches the body. Many children likely mistook exhaustion for anger. Many adults likely did the same. And yet, when illness came, another face appeared. If fever touched a child's skin, tasks paused. Cool cloths were placed on foreheads. Water was brought carefully. Neighbors suggested remedies. Herbs were steeped. Prayers murmured. Protective amulets adjusted at the neck. Mothers who had barked all week sat awake through the night counting breaths. Love in hard places often reveals itself most clearly when work stops. When health returned, so did routine. Back up now. You are well enough. Take this basket. The pause closes quickly because necessity knocks loudly. As children grew older, their mistakes became more expensive. A toddler breaking a cup caused annoyance. A 10-year-old losing a tool caused anger. A 14-year-old neglecting irrigation timing might threaten crops. With age came less forgiveness, because age meant expected usefulness. This could feel cruel to young hearts still wanting gentleness. But ancient households were economies before they were philosophies. Every hand mattered. Every wasted hour had weight. Childhood existed, but not as a long protected season for most people. Even games prepared the body. Running strengthened legs. Wrestling taught balance. Throwing stones taught aim. Board games taught patience and luck. Songs taught memory. Stories taught obedience, caution, cleverness, and respect for forces larger than oneself. At dusk the light softened, and so often did people. The western sky turned bronze, then red, then violet. Smoke from cooking fires rose straight in calmer air. The smell of baking bread drifted lane to lane. Cattle returned dusty and slow. Boats nosed into shore. Voices lowered without anyone announcing it. Children sensed this change with relief. Tasks remained, but edges dulled. Bring in the basket. Wash your feet. Feed the goat. Rinse the bowl. Then sit. That final permission, whether spoken or implied, may have felt like a gate opening. Families gathered in courtyards or rooftops where night air moved more freely. Some ate together from common dishes. Some listened to elders tell stories of floods, famines, lucky harvests, old neighbors, temple festivals, strange dreams, or ancestors whose names still lived in memory. Children leaned close in these hours. This was when questions could be asked. Why do stars move there? Why did Uncle lose those fingers? Why must I learn weaving if I hate it? Why did the river rise so high last year? Answers varied. Some practical, some religious, some evasive, some tender. Sometimes adults laughed. Sometimes they said, because that is the way. No sentence has shaped more childhoods. Night deepened. Lamps glowed. Crickets began. Frogs called from wetter places. The river made its old patient sounds. Feet were washed in basins. Mats unrolled. The day's aches announced themselves once bodies became still. Children who had been corrected 10 times might now receive a hand resting briefly on the head. Children ignored all afternoon might now be pulled near for warmth. Children scolded at dawn might hear a parent humming nearby in the dark. Contradiction is ancient. Many grew up learning that the same hands which hurried them could also comfort them. The same voice that commanded could sing softly. The same house that constrained them also sheltered them from desert cold, thieves, storms, hunger, and loneliness. This mixture shaped character in ways no scribe fully recorded. Some children became stern adults early, carrying rules forward because rules had carried them. Some became gentle in secret, offering to their own children what they had missed. Some repeated everything. Some resisted quietly. Some fled to other towns, other trades, temple service, military life, boat work, anything that loosened the old household grip. Others never left the lane where they were born. But tonight they are still young. They lie beneath linen cloths thin as breath. The room smells of ash and grain and warm walls cooling at last. Through the doorway, a strip of stars can be seen. Nearby, a parent shifts in sleep after a day of labor. A baby murmurs. A dog circles twice and settles. The child's hands are sore from carrying. Their legs ache from standing. Their ears still hold the echoes of correction. Yet drowsiness comes anyway, soft and certain. Tomorrow they will rise again into rules older than memory. But for now, in this brief dark pause beside the Nile, no one asks anything more of them. The darkest hour before dawn was often the gentlest part of the day. Even in busy settlements along the Nile, there came a stretch of night when almost nothing moved. Fires had settled into low red beds of ash. Lamps had gone out one by one. The last murmured voices had faded. Donkeys stood still with lowered heads. Dogs dreamed in their sleep. Palm fronds whispered only when a light breeze remembered them. For children, this hour held a rare freedom. No one was calling their name. No one was handing them a basket. No one was correcting the way they stood, walked, spoke, tied, swept, lifted, sorted, or carried. The world itself seemed to rest from instruction. A young boy sleeping near the doorway might feel cooler air touch his face. A girl curled beside her sisters might hear distant water moving beyond the houses. Someone's elbow pressed into someone else's side. Linen tangled around ankles. Mats rustled softly when bodies turned. These homes were often crowded. Privacy was thin. Space belonged to necessity. Yet in sleep, even crowded rooms can feel wide. Then, slowly, the day began again. First came one sound. A cough. Then another. A clay jar being shifted. A sandal scraping earth. The throat clearing of an older man preparing to stand. A mother whispering to herself as she reached for grain. Soon the small chain of waking noises linked together until the whole house was once more in motion. Children learned to hear command before words. A certain pace of footsteps meant hurry. The sound of a jar lid lifted sharply meant someone was impatient. A broom taken up early meant guests might come. Silence from a usually talkative parent meant trouble or worry. Long before many children learned letters, they learned moods. This was a useful skill. In homes where labor never truly ended, knowing the room could save pain. If father returned from fields with shoulders slumped and jaw set, this was not the hour to ask for a toy carved from scrap wood. If mother's grinding stone rhythm was quick and hard, best to fetch water before being told. If grandmother hummed while kneading dough, the morning might be kinder. So children watched faces the way farmers watched weather. The Nile Valley rewarded attention. A dark line of clouds far south could matter. A shift in wind could matter. The smell of wet earth could matter. In the same way, a lifted eyebrow or tightened mouth inside the home could shape the next hour. Some children became very wise in this manner, though no one called it wisdom. They knew when to disappear. They knew when to help without being asked. They knew when to make a younger sibling laugh and when laughter would offend. They knew how to soften anger by moving quickly. They knew which adult could be approached for mercy. They knew which could not. Morning meals were small but important. Bread from yesterday. Fresh bread if flour allowed it. Onions cut with practiced hands. Dates when fortune was kind. Beer thinned for nourishment more than pleasure. Sometimes lentils. Sometimes little else. Children learned another quiet rule at meals. Take enough, not too much. Do not reach first unless invited. Do not complain if food is plain. Do not waste crumbs. Crumbs were still food. A child who sulked at onions would hear stories of leaner years. A child who nibbled too slowly might find the bowl gone. Hunger taught faster than speeches. Then work divided the household. Men and older boys might head to fields, canals, quarries, boats, estates, temple storehouses, or workshops. Women and girls often remained nearer home, though their labor could be no less heavy, grinding grain, hauling water, weaving linen, washing clothes, tending children, baking, cleaning, mending, trading, carrying, preserving food, caring for elders. Of course, life was not perfectly separated. Many families did whatever survival required. Girls worked fields. Boys carried water. Widows managed property. Grandfathers watched toddlers. Servants filled gaps. Need often ignored tidy categories. But one truth remained common. Everyone was expected to contribute. A child who asked, "Why must I do this?" might hear, "Because we all do." It was not always meant harshly. Sometimes it was simply fact. In larger households, servants and laborers formed another layer of childhood. Some children were born to service. Some were taken through debt or circumstance. Some were attached to estates or temples. Their mornings began with the needs of others. Sweep the entry. Polish the stool. Bring water to the mistress. Watch the baby. Run to market. Move faster. These children might grow up surrounded by wealth they did not own, eating leftovers from tables they did not sit at, hearing music from rooms where they were not invited to rest. Yet even there, bonds formed. A servant girl might become the trusted companion of the woman she dressed each morning. A stable boy might learn kindness from an old groom. A kitchen child might be fed extra by a cook who remembered his own hungry youth. History often records status. It less often records affection crossing status lines. But surely it happened often. As the sun climbed, the roads brightened into dust and glare. Merchants entered towns with baskets of garlic, fish, pottery, linen, oil, baskets, sandals, charms, and news. Scribes sat in shaded corners with reed pens ready. Tax collectors passed through some districts like dry wind no one welcomed. Temple walls gleamed pale in strong light. Oxen moved patiently through burdens they had not chosen. Children loved markets when they could go. Markets were lessons disguised as wonder. So many smells. Coriander and onions. Fish and mud. Oil and leather. Fresh bread and sweating bodies. So many sounds. Haggling voices. Goats crying. Pottery clinking. Sandals slapping stone. So many sights. Bright beads. Copper knives. Painted jars. Bundles of papyrus. Foreign faces speaking unfamiliar rhythms. Yet even here, rules followed close behind fascination. Stay near me. Do not touch. Watch the purse. Carry this. Speak politely. Do not stare. A child could feel the whole world opening around them and still be tethered by the wrist. Sometimes that tether was safety. Sometimes it felt like prison. Often it was both. Education, where available, carried its own stern weather. The children of scribes, officials, priests, or ambitious artisans might be sent for instruction. They copied signs, memorized phrases, learned accounts, lists, moral sayings, prayers, formal speech, and proper forms. To modern ears, memorization may sound dry. In that world, memory was power carried inside the body. A boy who could count grain precisely might one day escape the hoe. A youth who could draft records might stand in shade while others bent in sun. So teachers pressed hard. Sit upright. Repeat clearly. Do not smear the ink. You know this already. Again. 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 Many school texts from Egypt praised the scribe's life over manual labor. They described the cracked hands of field workers, the weary backs of builders, the endless mud of farmers, the dangers of fishermen. Whether exaggerated or not, children hearing such lessons learned that discipline now might purchase comfort later. Still, present pain rarely feels lighter because of promised future relief. A cramped leg is a cramped leg. A hungry stomach is a hungry stomach. A teacher's impatience stings in any century. At home, girls often learn through immersion rather than formal schooling. Household management was an education without walls. Measuring grain by hand. Judging oven heat by feel. Repairing tears before they widened. Reading moods. Negotiating with neighbors. Remembering kinship ties. Stretching supplies. Caring for infants. Respecting ritual days. No certificate marked mastery. The house itself was the examiner. If bread rose well, if cloth held firm, if children stayed safe, if stores lasted, if guests were fed, if elders respected the home, then skill was proven. Many girls carried immense competence before adulthood, though few monuments praised it. By afternoon, fatigue often turned every voice sharper. This was when sibling quarrels rose fastest. A younger child touching forbidden tools. An older child refusing to share shade. Someone spilling water after a long walk. Someone losing the goat rope. Someone mocking someone else's mistake. Adults intervened with short patience. Enough. Separate. Fix it. Clean it. Silence now. Children learned that justice was often immediate and imperfect. Whoever seemed guiltier first might receive blame. Whoever cried loudest might receive less sympathy. Whoever was older was expected to know better. Whoever was younger was expected to learn quickly. Fairness was a luxury many tired households could not always afford. Yet compassion still appeared in humble ways. An older sister saving the softest piece of bread for a younger brother. A brother taking blame for a broken cup he did not break. A grandmother pretending not to see stolen figs. A father returning from work with a shell, bead, or smooth stone tucked in his palm for a child. A mother letting a feverish daughter sleep while claiming the girl had already finished her tasks. Love often hid behind practical masks. Season by season, children also learned about death. Ancient Egypt was full of life, but life was fragile. Illness came swiftly. Infections, injuries, childbirth dangers, fever, snake bite, flooding accidents, hunger in poor years, heat, and exhaustion all moved close to ordinary people. A child might one year play daily with a cousin, and the next year hear that cousin's mat remained rolled up. They learned mourning through household silence. Adults speaking softly. Neighbors bringing bread. Names said gently. A doorway left half open. Children were not always shielded from sorrow. there was little room for such shielding. Yet beliefs about afterlife, gods, memory, offerings, and continuing presence could bring comfort. The dead were not always imagined as gone forever, but changed, journeying, needing remembrance. So children learned to respect tombs, offerings, names, and the unseen world. They learned that life was work, and death was not the end of belonging. As evening approached, returning workers carried the day on their bodies. Mud on calves, dust in hair, shoulders marked by straps, hands nicked by rope or reed or blade, faces lined with squinting. Children watched adults come home and saw their own future walking toward them. Some felt pride. Some felt dread. Some felt both without words for either. Meals at day's end could be the richest hour emotionally, even when food was simple. The family was gathered. Tasks slowed. News was exchanged. Complaints could be aired. Jokes dared to appear. Children performed little stories of the day, imitating neighbors until adults laughed despite themselves. Laughter in tired homes can sound deeper than in easy homes. After eating, roofs often became places of relief. Night air moved more freely there. Families sat under stars while the heat escaped upward from walls. Across nearby roofs, silhouettes of other families appeared, talking low, mending nets, combing hair, rocking babies. Children lying on backs looked upward and saw a sky enormous beyond measure. No ceiling. No command. Only stars. Perhaps many first felt inner freedom there. Not freedom of circumstance, but freedom of thought. What lies beyond the desert? Do the stars know my name? Will I always live here? Could I become a scribe? Will mother always be tired? Why is father kind some nights and hard others? Why does everyone say that is the way? Questions such as these may never have been spoken aloud. Yet questions do not require permission to exist. When sleep finally returned, it often came suddenly. A child mid-thought would drift while hearing distant oars knock wood against wood at the riverbank. Frogs called from dark reeds. Somewhere a late traveler passed. Somewhere a temple lamp still burned. Somewhere another child was still being rocked, still crying, still sick, still awake. But here, on this roof or in this room, the body surrendered. Tomorrow would bring commands, corrections, duties, and the endless education of rules. Tonight, for a few quiet hours, the stars asked nothing at all. There were days when the wind came in from the desert carrying fine dust that settled over everything. It gathered on thresholds, on bowls, on sleeping mats, on shoulders damp with sweat, on jars carefully sealed the night before. It softened footprints in the lane and turned distant trees pale. Children woke to these mornings rubbing grit from their eyes, already knowing that the day would feel longer than usual. Dust made work heavier. Bread dough needed more care. Water tasted different. Eyes stung. Cloth had to be shaken and folded again. Adults became impatient more quickly when small troubles multiplied. A child who moved slowly on such a morning might hear sharper words than yesterday for the same delay. Not because they were less loved. Because everyone was already tired. This was one of the first truths many children learned without anyone naming it. Much of the world's harshness does not begin in hatred. It begins in strain. A mother who had slept poorly because the baby coughed all night. A father whose back had tightened from hauling stone. A grandmother worried over stores of grain running low. An older brother anxious about a tool he had damaged. When strain filled a house, children felt it like weather. They became careful. They watched doors open. They listened to footsteps. They tried to make themselves useful before blame found them. Sometimes they succeeded. Sometimes children are blamed simply because they are near. On those dusty mornings, lanes still filled with movement. Life did not wait for comfort. Women wrapped cloth higher across nose and mouth and carried jars to water. Men led donkeys toward work sites. Traders brushed dust from baskets and continued on. Children coughed, laughed, complained, were hushed, and then sent to tasks all the same. The Nile remained steady beyond it all. Its water moved with calm patience beside a world of hurry. Reeds bent and lifted. Boats crossed in slow lines. Birds landed without concern for household moods or village tensions. For many children, the river must have seemed like another kind of parent. Older than anyone. Unmoved by shouting. Reliable when it wished to be. Dangerous when ignored. Some children were sent often to its banks. They carried jars with rounded shoulders and narrow necks, balanced by practice more than strength. They walked in groups when possible, speaking quietly until adults were out of earshot. Then voices brightened. Stories began. Complaints escaped. Secrets were traded in fragments. Did you hear them fighting last night? My brother broke the hoe and blamed me. Mother says I grind too slowly. Father says I may go to market next week. My aunt says I will be promised soon. The path to water was also the path to honesty. Children who were obedient at home could become playful there. They nudged one another, raced for smooth stones, tested who could carry a full jar without spilling. For a little while, rules loosened. But never fully. A jar broken at the river was still broken. A child wandering too near deep mud was still shouted back. A delay returning home was still remembered. Freedom came in small measured cups. Girls often learned balance young. A jar on the head required posture, patience, and a steady pace. Shoulders relaxed. Chin level. Steps even. A child who mastered this carried not only water, but dignity. Older women noticed. Good. Straight spine. You are learning. Praise in practical societies often sounded like evaluation. Boys too were watched for signs of usefulness. Could he lift well? Could he tie knots securely? Could he endure heat without complaint? Could he keep count of animals? Could he listen once and remember? A boy who showed these qualities might receive rare approval in a father's voice. Come with me tomorrow. Such simple invitations could mean everything. To walk beside an adult man into fields or workshops was more than an errand. It was recognition. You are becoming necessary. Yet necessity can feel heavy when placed on young shoulders. In farming season, some children learned irrigation before they understood rest. Channels had to be opened and blocked with care. Mud banks repaired. Flow directed. Too little water harmed crops. Too much could drown them. Timing mattered. A child standing ankle-deep in cool mud beneath harsh sun might push earth with hands and feet while insects buzzed around the ears. The work was repetitive, messy, and tiring. But the water itself could feel wonderful. Cool against skin. Soft around toes. Alive with movement. Even labor sometimes carried comfort inside it. At midday, houses became ovens. Walls trapped morning warmth and added the sun's gift to it. Roof spaces were brighter but hotter. Shade was prized like treasure. Children squeezed beside walls where narrow bands of coolness moved slowly with the sun. Meals were taken quietly on the hardest days. Talking used energy. Chewing seemed enough. A bowl passed hand to hand. Bread torn into equal portions. Water measured by need. Adults staring into middle distance while eating. Children learn then that silence can mean many things. Anger. Fatigue. Worry. Peace. It takes years to know which is which. Sometimes a child mistook exhaustion for rejection. A father too tired to answer questions might seem cold. A mother too weary to smile might seem distant. Yet after the meal, that same father might quietly fix a broken sandal strap. That same mother might save the last date for the child. Love was often translated through action rather than speech. Ancient homes were full of work that never announced itself. Sweeping before dawn so scorpions or insects might be seen. Checking stored grain for spoilage. Patching roof reeds before rain. Turning jars so cracks did not worsen. Sorting lentils from stones. Watching toddlers' every heartbeat. Remembering who owed whom. Remembering ritual days. Remembering the names of the dead. Children watched these invisible labors and slowly inherited them. Many rules existed because someone long ago had learned through hardship. Cover the grain. Tie the goat higher. Do not leave water open. Bring tools inside. Store bread above the floor. Shake bedding before sleep. At times such rules felt endless. At times they were what stood between the family and disaster. This made childhood confusing. The person who scolded you might also be protecting you. The task you hated might also preserve the house. The rule that felt cruel might have grown from old necessity. Children do not always know this while living it. Some never know. There were also days of temple visits and sacred routines, when households washed more carefully and clothing was chosen with extra thought. Offerings of bread, flowers, beer, incense, or small goods were prepared according to means. Even poor families could bring something modest. Children were expected to behave well there. Stand respectfully. Do not run. Do not laugh loudly. Do not touch what is not yours. Watch and learn. Temples could feel enormous to small eyes. Painted walls. Tall columns. Cool stone shaded from the sun. Smells of incense and oil. Murmured prayers. Priests moving in ordered ways. Statues staring with calm eternal faces. For some children, this was awe. For others, boredom. For many, both at once. Religion also taught rules, but gentler ones sometimes. Honor the gods. Respect order. Keep promises. Care for family dead. Speak truth where possible. Give thanks when blessed. Whether these teachings softened homes varied from family to family. Some parents used belief to comfort. The gods see your effort. Your grandmother watches over us. Goodness matters even when no one praises it. Others used belief to enforce. The gods punish laziness. You shame the family. Obey, or misfortune follows. Human voices shape sacred words into many forms. As children entered adolescence, the household gaze changed. Little mistakes once dismissed now drew concern. How you spoke reflected the family. How you dressed signaled readiness. Whom you looked at mattered. How late you returned mattered. How diligently you worked mattered more than before. Girls might be watched for modesty, skill, and marriage prospects. Boys for stamina, reliability, and earning potential. Childhood loosened quietly, often before the young person was ready. A girl who yesterday played by the river with friends might today be told to remain closer to home. A boy who once chased dogs in the lane might now be expected to rise with men before dawn. The shift could feel sudden. Inside, they were still partly children. Outside, others had begun speaking to them as adults in training. Many young people likely carried private loneliness then. Too old for carefree play. Too young for authority. Useful enough to burden. Not established enough to choose. This in-between season has lived in every century. Yet there were joys still. Festival nights with music echoing from courtyards. Friendships formed during errands. Shared laughter while grinding grain. Flirtations hidden in glances at market stalls. Swimming where elders could not see. Stories whispered on rooftops long after lamps were meant to be out. A hand brushed against another hand near a jar line. A joke told so softly only one friend heard it. A stolen fig eaten behind a wall. These small sweetnesses mattered greatly in rule-bound lives. Evening remained the softest teacher. When the sun lowered and shadows stretched long through lanes, adults often seemed more human again. The day's demands had been met or postponed. Shoulders lowered. Voices lost some edge. Children dared approach with requests saved since morning. May I go with Uncle tomorrow? May I sleep on the roof tonight? May I keep this shell? May I visit cousin after work? Answers might still be no. But now they might be gentle no. Sometimes even yes. Then night would gather over the village in layers. Blue fading to indigo. Bird calls ending. Cooking smells rising. First stars appearing. The river darkening into a band of quiet metal. Families ate, washed, spoke softly, and prepared for sleep. Children lay down carrying more than fatigue. They carried lessons. How to read a room. How to carry weight. How to hide tears. How to help before being asked. How to wait for softness until evening. How to notice kindness when it came in rough clothing. Outside, the Nile moved under moonlight as it had for ages beyond counting. Inside, another generation drifted into sleep, growing older one rule at a time. There were mornings when the village woke to the smell of baking bread before any light touched the horizon. The scent moved through narrow lanes and over low walls, warm and steady, slipping through cracks in doors and into sleeping rooms. It reached children before voices did. It entered dreams and gently pulled them toward waking. For a moment, lying beneath thin linen in the dark, a child might feel only comfort. Then came the rest of morning. A parent's footsteps. The scrape of grain stones. The cough of smoke beginning in the oven. A jar set down harder than necessary. A baby already crying. The soft comfort of scent became the firm shape of duty. Up now. Bring wood. Fetch water. Watch the child. Brush the floor. Children learned quickly that pleasant beginnings did not promise easy days. The ovens themselves were small worlds of labor. Clay domes blackened by years of use. Ash gathered at their mouths. Heat rising in waves that reddened cheeks and dried hands. Women and older girls often bent near them while younger children passed tools, shaped dough, fanned coals, or carried finished loaves to baskets. Bread was ordinary, but ordinary things can require endless effort. Grain had to be grown, cut, dried, stored, protected from pests, ground by hand, mixed, shaped, baked, carried, saved. Every loaf held many tired hours. A child who wasted bread might be corrected sharply, not because bread was sacred in itself, but because labor was. Respect the loaf, and you respect the hands that made it. Some children understood this young. Others learned through hunger. Grinding grain was among the most common sounds of domestic life. Stone against stone, steady and rough, hour after hour. It began before sunrise in many homes and returned again later in the day. Women did much of this labor, but girls often joined early, kneeling beside mothers, sisters, aunts, or grandmothers. Their shoulders burned. Their wrists ached. Their knees pressed hard earth. Yet while hands worked, words could flow. Stories of relatives. Advice about marriage. Warnings about men. Memories of floods. Complaints about neighbors. Quiet laughter. Recipes. Prayers. Children listening nearby learned family history mixed with flower dust. A boy passing through might hear only noise. A girl working there might hear inheritance. In homes with little space, almost every task was public. Children grew up watched. Mistakes had witnesses. Triumphs too, though they were often smaller than mistakes. A jar carried without spilling. A loaf shaped evenly. A toddler soothed to sleep. A basket woven tightly. A goat returned safely. An errand remembered exactly. Such successes rarely earned celebration, yet they built trust. Trust was precious. A trusted child was sent alone. A trusted child handled keys or stores. A trusted child was believed first in disputes. A trusted child might hear adults speak honestly nearby. To earn trust in a strict household could feel better than praise. By mid-morning, streets warmed and brightened. Vendors called from shaded corners. A potter's wheel turned. Linen flapped on lines. Children ran messages from house to house, sometimes glad for the excuse to move. Go tell your aunt we need oil. Ask if they saw our goat. Take this bowl back. Bring your uncle here. Errands gave young people glimpses of other homes. And other homes could be surprising. One house loud with argument. Another quiet and orderly. One mother laughing often. Another stern as dry wood. One family eating well. Another stretching little food with much water. Children compared silently. Why are they kinder there? Why are they richer there? Why does their father sing? Why does ours never rest? These questions rarely had simple answers. Some homes had more land. Some had fewer mouths to feed. Some carried old griefs. Some had illness hidden inside them. Some adults had gentler natures. Some had been treated gently themselves. Children saw effects long before causes. For those born into artisan families, workspaces could feel like second homes. The smell of clay in a potter's yard was cool and earthy. Wet hands shaped vessels that spun into smooth curves beneath practiced fingers. Children were warned not to bump shelves lined with drying bowls and jars. Do not run here. Watch your elbows. Carry only one at a time. Slowly. A smashed pot meant wasted clay, wasted time, wasted fuel for firing. It could also mean a hard look from a tired parent. In weaving rooms, rhythm ruled. Threads stretched in ordered lines. Hands passed shuttles through openings with calm repetition. The click and knock of loom parts created a music of labor. Girls often learned patience there, whether they wished to or not. Do not tug. Count rows. Keep edges straight. Fix it now before it grows worse. That last lesson applied to more than cloth. In carpentry yards, boys watched wood transformed. Rough planks became stools, chests, doors, handles, sled parts, frames. Shavings curled at the feet of men who knew grain lines by touch. Apprentices learned to sharpen tools, sweep, hold board steady, and wait for chances to try. Waiting was a major part of growing up. Waiting until strong enough. Waiting until trusted enough. Waiting until older siblings married. Waiting until debts were paid. Waiting until parents softened. Waiting until one's own life seemed to begin. Sometimes it did not feel like life had begun at all, only preparation. The sun climbed. Heat thickened. Flies multiplied. Tempers shortened. Children often became most invisible at noon. Adults were absorbed by fatigue, hunger, and unfinished tasks. This invisibility could wound or delight. A child craving attention felt forgotten. A child craving peace felt free. Some slipped into shade with friends and whispered games. Pebbles became counters. Sticks became boats. Mud became tiny villages. They copied adult life in play because adult life surrounded them completely. One child pretended to be the stern mother. Another the weary father. Another the merchant demanding payment. Another the scribe who knew everything. They laughed at roles that burdened real people. Play is one of the oldest forms of understanding. Yet games ended quickly when called. Enough now. Back inside. Bring the basket. Mind the baby. Children returned to duty carrying dust on knees and sunlight in hair. Afternoons were often the hour of instruction. Not formal lessons only, but practical passing down. How to judge if figs are spoiled. How to patch linen invisibly. How to keep mice from grain. How to speak respectfully to officials. How to soothe a fever with cloth and water. How to spot a cracked jar before lifting it. How to greet in-laws. How to avoid gossip. How to endure gossip. Many teachings concern survival among people rather than survival against nature. Human communities can wound as surely as deserts. A careless word might sour relations for years. An unpaid favor might return at the worst moment. A public insult might stain marriage prospects. Children learn social caution early. Smile there. Say less. Thank them even if they boast. Do not repeat what you heard. Remember who helped us. Remember who did not. Memory itself was labor. Grandparents often carried much of this memory. In households where elders lived long enough to guide the young, they served as living archives. They knew who once owned which field, who quarreled with whom, who married for love, who married for grain, who lied, who healed, who prayed, who drank too much, who vanished north, who returned changed. Children sitting near elders absorbed more than stories. They inherited maps of human terrain. Some elders were soft and indulgent. Some sharper than knives. Many had become both. They had seen enough hardship to value discipline, and enough sorrow to value tenderness. Toward evening, workers returned in waves. First a few, then many. Dusty figures along the lanes. Boats drawing in. Animals herded home. Calls between neighbors. News passing quickly. Did the canal wall hold? Was there work tomorrow? Who is ill? Did the taxmen come? Is the market price rising? Children listened though adults did not always notice. To children, news was weather forecast for the household mood. Good harvest talk meant easier faces. Tax talk meant tight jaws. Illness talk meant hushed movement. Marriage talk meant restless excitement. Death talk meant lowered eyes. The evening meal gathered these moods together. Some families ate with gratitude. Some with tension. Some with the numb silence of long fatigue. Yet food shared in one room still created a kind of belonging, however imperfect. After eating, chores remained. Bowls rinsed. Ash managed. Animals checked. Water covered. Doors secured. Mats spread. Only then did leisure appear, small and fragile. A father might repair a toy from scrap wood. A mother might braid her daughter's hair slowly. Brothers might wrestle lightly before being scolded. Sisters might sing while folding cloth. Grandparents might tell stories of foolish crocodiles, clever farmers, wandering spirits, stubborn kings, or miraculous floods. Children often loved stories where the weak outwitted the strong. Perhaps adults did too. Under starlight on rooftops or in courtyards, some children asked questions too large for daylight. Why do people become angry when tired? Why must girls do this and boys do that? Why does wealth stay in some houses? Why did my brother die? Will I choose my own husband? Will father ever praise me? Will mother rest when I am grown? Adults answered as they could. Sometimes with wisdom. Sometimes with tradition. Sometimes with silence. Silence itself was often an answer. There are things even elders do not know how to mend. When sleep approached, bodies gave in before minds did. Children lay sore from carrying, kneeling, walking, grinding, lifting, watching younger ones, standing in heat, obeying many voices. Yet beneath fatigue there could also be pride. I did not spill today. I carried 2 jars. I remembered the market list. Mother trusted me with the oven. Father took me to the field. Grandmother asked my help. In societies built on necessity, competence could nourish the heart. Outside, the Nile moved through darkness as always, reflecting broken lines of moonlight. Reeds swayed softly. Frogs called in wet places. Somewhere distant, an oar dipped once, then again. Inside the houses, another generation drifted to sleep, learning that love was often hidden inside labor, and that growing older sometimes meant discovering it for yourself where no one had named it. There were seasons when the river rose high and spread itself across the land like a calm and shining sheet. Paths disappeared beneath water. Field borders softened and vanished. Familiar places became islands of higher ground. Palm trunks reflected in broad still pools. Boats moved where sandals had walked only weeks before. The Nile, patient for so long within its banks, seemed to stretch its limbs. For children, flood season could feel magical at first. The world had changed overnight. A lane ended in water. A field became a mirror. Fish appeared where dust once lay. Boats tied near houses that had never needed boats before. Yet wonder was always followed by rules. Do not go there alone. Stay away from the deep edge. Watch for snakes. Do not untie ropes. Keep the little ones near. The same waters that brought fertile mud could also take children quickly and without ceremony. Adults knew this well. Many warnings were born from memory. So boys who wanted to leap from banks were pulled back by wrists. Girls who wandered too near reeds were called sharply home. Even playful splashing could earn stern looks if jars, baskets, or tools were nearby. Children often heard danger in the voice before they understood danger itself. Flood season changed labor rather than ending it. Fields resting beneath water meant some outdoor work paused, but other tasks swelled. Repairs began. Tools were sharpened. Walls patched. Roof reeds replaced. Nets mended. Storage jars inspected. Boats caulked. Baskets rewoven. Linen repaired. Debts discussed. Plans made for planting when waters withdrew. Children discovered that when one duty sleeps, another wakes. A boy hoping for idle days might instead spend hours scraping old mud from a wall before new plaster could be pressed on. His fingers dried and cracked. Dust clung to sweat. He looked longingly at boys paddling a small reed raft nearby. "Keep working," said his father. "Rain will not wait." Though true rain was rare, urgency often borrowed any language available. A girl expecting more time with friends might be kept indoors helping sort stores of grain. Good kernels one side. Damaged kernels another. Stones removed. Insects picked out. Basket after basket. Her back ached from bending. Her mind wandered toward laughter outside. "Pay attention," said her mother. "If we miss spoilage now, we go hungry later." Many childhood frustrations stood opposite practical truths. During these watery months, homes could feel more crowded. More people near each other for longer hours. More chances for friction. A younger child underfoot. An uncle sleeping in the corner. A cousin visiting because their house needed repairs. Wet sandals left in the wrong place. Someone using too much oil. Someone snoring. Someone borrowing tools without asking. Children learn that closeness can be warm, and closeness can be exhausting. They also learn to find private space where none officially existed. Behind jars. On rooftops. Near tethered animals. By the far wall in afternoon shade. At the river edge while checking ropes. A few stolen minutes alone can feel luxurious in crowded lives. Stories often grew richer in flood season. When movement slowed and darkness came earlier to minds tired of indoor work, elders spoke more. Lamps flickered against mud walls. Children leaned on folded knees. The smell of oil and warm clay filled the room. They heard tales of God sailing the sky. Of wise farmers who outwitted greedy officials. Of spirits who disliked arrogance. Of travelers who crossed deserts and returned with strange goods. Of ancestors whose names still mattered. Stories carried lessons, of course. Obey wisely. Work steadily. Do not boast. Respect the dead. Honor promises. But children also listened for something else. Possibility. Could a poor person become fortunate? Could a clever child be seen? Could harsh times change? Could the world hold roads beyond this lane? Stories were windows cut into necessity. Some children loved the scribed stories best. Scrolls, records, letters, signs no one else could read. The mystery of symbols turning into power. A mark on papyrus could move grain, labor, payment, judgment. To a child who spent days carrying mud or sweeping floors, this must have seemed close to magic. Others loved boatmen's stories. Distant towns. Different accents. Markets with strange spices. Temples larger than villages. The feeling of moving while everyone else stayed. Children often dream first through the work of others. When floodwaters slowly withdrew, the land changed once more. Dark rich mud remained in sheets and ridges. The smell of wet earth rose everywhere, deep and heavy and alive. Fields had to be marked again. Channels reopened. Sowing began quickly. Now the household pace sharpened. Wake earlier. Move faster. No delays now. The season waits for no one. Children who had enjoyed slower evenings suddenly found dawn arriving like a command. Seeds had to be carried. Birds driven off. Oxen guided. Water directed. Tools cleaned each night for use again at first light. This was one of history's oldest lessons. Nature keeps time without pity. If seed went in late, harvest suffered. If channels clogged, plants thirst. If weeds gained advantage, labor doubled later. So adults pushed the young hard in these windows of necessity. A father might snap at a son for tying a sack poorly. A mother might scold a daughter for oversleeping once. Not because one knot or one morning ruined all things, but because seasons taught fear of small delays becoming large losses. Children do not always hear the fear beneath anger. They hear only anger. In wealthier estates, overseers and labor gangs shaped a different childhood atmosphere. The children of laborers saw parents summoned early, counted, directed, watched. They learned that rules could come not only from family, but from distant power wearing cleaner linen. Stand there. Carry this load. Move to that field. Wait for your measure. Return tomorrow. Such children understood hierarchy in their bones before they knew the word. Yet even on estates, life made room for ordinary tenderness. Mothers tied charms around children's wrists. Fathers carved tiny animals from scrap wood. Older siblings shared crusts and gossip. Lovers found corners to whisper in. Friends laughed while hauling together. Power rarely erases humanity completely. In towns, markets brightened after flood retreat. Fresh produce returned. Fish were plentiful in some weeks. Pottery changed hands. Cloth traders called out values loudly. Scribes sat ready with accounts. Smells mingled into one thick breath of city life. Children sent to market carried strict instructions. Only this much oil. Do not be cheated on onions. Count the change. Come straight back. If they returned correctly, trust grew. If they returned short, suspicion followed, whether loss came from error, theft, or cunning sellers. Markets were classrooms without mercy. A child learned quickly how adults lied politely. How weights could be nudged. How smiles could hide advantage. How kindness and trickery sometimes wore the same face. Many children also learned generosity there. A vendor slipping an extra fig to a familiar family's child. A butcher saving bones for soup. A neighbor paying the missing copper quietly. Community can survive even where bargaining thrives. As children entered later youth, marriage talk often arrived before inner readiness. Families discussed alliances, security, land, reputation, fertility, companionship, labor needs, debts. Young hearts were only one ingredient among many. A girl grinding grain might hear her name mentioned in the next room and know her future was being weighed like flour. A boy returning from fields might be told, casually as weather, that he would soon need his own household. Neither may have felt prepared. Growing up often means being announced ready by others. Some marriages were kind. Some difficult. Most likely mixed, as human unions tend to be. But before marriage itself came another rule-bound threshold: become useful enough to join adult burdens fully. Children sensed this approaching and often clung quietly to remaining freedoms. One more swim with friends. One more season sleeping beside siblings. One more evening story without adult responsibilities waiting after. One more careless laugh. The body may grow steadily, but childhood often ends in pieces. Night during flood season could be especially beautiful. Water reflected stars so that sky seemed above and below. Boats rocked gently against posts. Frogs sang loudly from wet banks. Coolness traveled farther over open surfaces. Even stern adults sometimes sat longer in silence, watching moonlight move. Children beside them may have felt a strange peace. The same father who shouted in fields sat quiet now. The same mother whose hands never rested let them rest in her lap. The same house full of commands softened under darkness. Contradictions became normal. Many children learned not to ask whether they were loved. They learned to notice when extra bread was placed near them, when a blanket was adjusted at night, when someone defended them before neighbors, when a father brought them along, when a mother trusted them with keys, when an elder saved them a place in the shade. Love often arrived disguised as responsibility, protection, or food. Lying awake beside open doorways, hearing water lap somewhere beyond the lane, children may have imagined futures shaped by all they knew. Some hoped to be kinder than their parents. Some hoped to be stronger. Some hoped simply to rest more. Some hoped never to worry over grain. Some hoped to leave. Some hoped never to leave. And many hoped for things they could not yet name. Then sleep came, soft as river mist. Tomorrow the waters would continue falling. Fields would call. Rules would return with sunrise. But for these few dark hours, the flooded world shimmered quietly, and no one needed to grow up until morning. There were years when the harvest was generous, and years when it was thin. Children learn the difference not by counting measures in storehouses, but by the faces of adults at supper. A generous year made shoulders looser. Voices carried more warmth. Bread portions seemed less carefully watched. A thin year tightened every movement. A mother cut loaves smaller. A father stared longer into bowls before eating. Grandparents spoke in lower tones. Neighbors visited more often, though not always for cheerful reasons. Children sensed scarcity long before anyone explained it. They heard whispers near doorways. How much remains? Will it last? Can your brother lend grain? What did the officials demand? Did the river fail upstream? Such questions drifted through rooms while children pretended not to listen. They learned that worry often travels in half sentences. In lean years, rules hardened. Do not waste even crumbs. Do not feed scraps to dogs. Do not take dates without asking. Do not trade anything from the house. Do not complain of hunger. Adults who might once overlook small thefts now watched closely. A missing onion mattered. A cracked jar mattered. A spilled sack of grain could darken an entire evening. Children sometimes mistook this vigilance for meanness. But empty storage jars create their own sternness. A child reaching for extra bread might meet a sharper hand than expected. Not because the child was greedy, but because there must also be bread tomorrow. Ancient households lived close to edges modern comfort can forget. Yet generosity did not vanish in hard times. Often it became more visible. A mother pretending she had already eaten. A father claiming he was not hungry. An older sister splitting her share in half. A neighbor arriving with lentils and saying they had too much. A grandmother saving dried figs for the smallest children. Sacrifice often wears ordinary clothing. When food grew scarce, children also worked more. There were reeds to gather for mats that might be traded. Fish to catch inside waters. Wild greens to collect. Odd jobs to seek. Extra errands to wealthier homes. Fuel to gather from dung and brush. Even the youngest could be made useful somehow. To grow up in such years meant learning that childhood could be postponed by fortune and shortened by need. Markets changed mood during scarcity. Bargaining became sharper. Faces more guarded. Prices discussed with disbelief or anger. Merchants watched hands carefully. Buyers counted coins twice. Rumors spread quickly. A child sent to market in these times carried not just a basket, but pressure. Bring back enough. Do not be fooled. Do not lose a single piece. Come quickly. If they succeeded, relief met them at the door. If not, disappointment could feel heavy enough to bend the spine. Some children became capable beyond their years in such seasons. They learned weights, values, lies, roots, moods, and who might grant kindness. Necessity often creates skill without asking permission. Others became quiet. There is a kind of silence children learn when they realize adults cannot fix everything. They stop asking for treats. They stop mentioning hunger so often. They watch more. They offer help before being told. They become careful with hopes. Not every hardship made people noble. Strain could also sour tempers. Arguments rose more easily when stores fell lower. Old resentments resurfaced. Brothers disputed inheritance. Neighbors accused one another of selfishness. Spouses spoke with tired sharpness. Children living among this learned another old lesson: love can weaken under fear, then strengthen again when fear passes. They also learned to leave the room when voices changed. Outside, even difficult years held beauty no one could ration. The sky still blazed gold at dawn. The river still moved in silver bands. Date palms still rustled above courtyards. Birds still crossed the marsh in elegant lines. Moonlight still made humble walls look noble. Children noticed these things perhaps more deeply in hard times, because beauty costs nothing. There were also years of abundance when laughter returned more easily. Bread was thicker. Beer less diluted. Fish more common. Oil used more freely. New sandals might appear. Roof repairs were done sooner. A festival felt possible again. Children in such years ran louder through lanes. Games lasted longer before being interrupted. Adults tolerated mess with greater patience. Someone might sing while working. Someone might joke at supper. Someone might say yes to a request that would have earned no last year. From a child's view, fortune often looked like permission. In households with enough, parents could afford softness. This has been true in many ages. Time and security make gentleness easier to practice. Exhaustion and fear often crowd it out. Still, even prosperous homes carried rules. Sit properly. Respect elders. Do not shame the family. Learn your role. Wealth does not dissolve expectation. It often adds layers to it. For boys nearing manhood, physical strength became a measure watched by others. Could he lift sacks? Could he guide oxen? Could he endure long sun? Could he defend a household if trouble came? Could he work without complaint? Praise for boys often arrived through usefulness. He works like a man now. Such words might fill the chest with pride, even while placing new burdens there. For girls nearing womanhood, another kind of scrutiny gathered. Could she manage a home? Was she skilled with cloth and grain? Did she speak respectfully? Was she healthy? Modest? Steady? Fertile looking in the vague and often unfair judgments of others? Girls learned that being observed could become a constant condition. They also learned to read that gaze and move within it. Some complied. Some quietly resisted. Some found power through excellence. Some found refuge in humor. Some dreamed of elsewhere. Children do not all respond to rules in the same way. In every generation there were those who accepted household ways deeply, believing order itself was goodness. There were those who obeyed outwardly while nurturing private independence. There were those who challenged openly and paid for it. There were those who bent so long they forgot their own shape. No scribe recorded most of them. But they lived all the same. Evenings in harvest time had their own special weariness. Dust from threshing clung to skin. Chaff lodged in hair. Arms trembled after lifting bundles all day. Yet meals after harvest labor could feel deeply satisfying. Bread warm from fresh grain. Beans seasoned better than usual. Fish roasted over coals. A little more beer. The knowledge that stores were filling. Children watching adults relax even slightly may have felt safer than any speech could make them feel. Safety often enters a room through the posture of elders. After meals, courtyards glowed with lamplight. Neighbors drifted in and out. News traveled. Engagements discussed. Illnesses mentioned. Jars borrowed. Debts remembered. Jokes repeated. Children half listened while pretending sleepiness. They were learning social life by immersion. Who speaks first? Who interrupts? Who is deferred to? Who is mocked gently? Who is avoided? Who always asks for favors? Who always helps? These lessons shaped futures as surely as field work did. Some nights musicians passed for festivals or celebrations. A drum beat carried through lanes. Clapping followed. Flute notes rose into warm dark air. Children longed to stay awake for all of it. Sometimes they were allowed. Sometimes not. Bed now. Tomorrow starts early. Many disappointments in childhood are simply collisions with schedules. On rooftops under stars, older children sometimes spoke honestly with one another in ways impossible near adults. Do you think your father likes you? Will you marry that old man? I want to join the boats north. I hate weaving. I want 10 children. I want none. I would rather carry stone than marry him. I wish mother laughed more. Such confessions, whispered into darkness, may have been among the truest conversations of their lives. Friendship can become shelter where households cannot. When illness visited during harvest or scarcity, the whole balance shook. One strong worker bedridden meant more tasks for others. Children stepped into gaps quickly. A son too young might lead animals. A daughter might manage cooking alone. A nephew might sleep elsewhere to help. No one asked whether they felt ready. Readiness was often assigned. Yet this responsibility sometimes brought dignity too. A child trusted with adult tasks could feel suddenly visible. He did well. She kept the house running. Simple praise remembered for years. Late at night, after lamps dimmed and bodies settled, children lay hearing the familiar sounds of their world, a parent snoring softly, reeds tapping outside, insects singing, water faint in the distance, someone coughing in another room. They also heard the quieter sounds inside themselves. Fear of the future. Longing for approval. Resentment of unfairness. Pride in growing skill. Tenderness for siblings. Dreams too large to explain. Ancient childhood was not one thing. It was many braided together. Duty and play. Hunger and feast. Correction and comfort. Obedience and secret rebellion. Weariness and wonder. Love, often present, but rarely announced. And by dawn, as always, thought would give way to movement. A voice in the dark. Up now. The day is waiting. There were homes where many generations lived beneath one roof, or beneath roofs so close they might as well have been one. A grandfather sleeping near the doorway for cooler air. A grandmother beside storage jars she trusted no one else to manage. Parents with infants close at hand. Older children lined along walls. Cousins visiting for weeks that became months. An unmarried aunt who never truly left. A widowed uncle who arrived with tools and sadness. Children in such homes grew up surrounded by people, voices, smells, habits, opinions, and memory. They rarely felt alone. They also rarely felt unobserved. Someone always noticed if they returned late. Someone always knew if they had cried. Someone always commented if they ate too quickly. Someone always remembered a mistake from 3 seasons ago. Community can comfort. Community can crowd. A child reaching for independence often found an elder already sitting where independence hoped to stand. Yet large households carried protections smaller homes could not always offer. If a mother was ill, an aunt could knead dough. If a father was injured, an uncle might guide the boy to work. If grain ran low, someone had hidden a reserve. If children quarreled, an elder judged. If a baby cried at midnight, another pair of arms existed. Children learned early that family was not merely affection. It was structure. Structure can feel heavy while holding the roof up. Grandparents often became teachers of patience. They moved more slowly than others, which changed the rhythm around them. A child sent in haste to fetch water might be stopped halfway. Come here first. Help me untie this cord. Read me that mark on the jar. Tell me what happened in the lane. The child sighed inside, perhaps, eager to run. Yet while fingers worked at knots or dust was brushed from shelves, stories emerged. When I was young, the river rose higher than this. Your father was lazier than you. Your mother once climbed that wall and tore her dress. There was a famine when I was small. That family next door used to own donkeys. Children often received family truth from old mouths. Some stories were warm. Some sharpened reputations. Some were repeated so often they became household furniture. In homes with elders, discipline could come from many directions. A mother scolded for carelessness. A father for disrespect. A grandmother for posture. A grandfather for waste. An aunt for gossip. An older cousin for touching forbidden tools. Children sometimes felt the world itself had become one long correction. Yet the same network that criticized also defended. If a father struck too quickly, an elder might say enough. If a child was blamed unfairly, someone might speak up. If tears were hidden, a grandmother might still notice. Many children first learned justice not from law, but from whichever relative chose fairness that day. In houses crowded with people, objects mattered deeply. Space was limited. Goods were hard-won. A broken jar was not merely broken clay. It was lost storage, lost trade value, lost labor. A torn linen cloth was not fabric alone. It was weaving hours undone. So rules gathered around objects. Do not lean there. Do not step over that basket. Use 2 hands. Set it down gently. Ask before taking. Put it back exactly. Children raised among scarcity often become careful with things. They know that possessions can carry hidden histories of effort. Meals in large households were complex little ceremonies of motion. Bowls passed hand to hand. Bread divided. Children positioned according to age, usefulness, or habit. Someone always asked for more salt. Someone always complained it was too little. Babies needed feeding first or last depending on the household logic of the day. Children learned rank by where they sat. Near elders could mean trust. Near the doorway could mean lower status or simply more room. Serving others before oneself could be duty or honor. Such meanings changed from home to home, but children studied them all. Food also carried politics. Who received the larger fish piece? Who got the last fig? Who was told to wait? Who was urged to eat more? These moments, tiny to outsiders, could stay in memory for years. Many adults do not realize how closely children watch fairness at the table. During arguments, crowded homes offered no easy escape. Voices filled every corner. A dispute between adults could turn the whole house tense. Children froze in place or vanished into practiced hiding spots. Behind hanging cloth. Near the roof ladder. Outside with the goats. On a neighbor's threshold pretending errands. They learned to read whether anger would burn quickly or smolder all evening. They also learned that adults often fought over burdens children never saw clearly: debts, jealousy, exhaustion, favoritism, old insults, fear of tomorrow. To a child, thunder is thunder even if one cannot explain clouds. Yet there were also nights of warmth impossible in lonely homes. A baby passed from arm to arm. 3 women laughing while braiding hair. Men returning from work telling exaggerated stories. Children falling asleep to the sound of many breathing bodies. An elder humming a song older than memory. Belonging has a sound, and it is often crowded. For children without siblings, cousins could become brothers and sisters. They competed, protected, mocked, shared secrets, and fought over everything small enough to hold. They built games from pebbles, sticks, scraps of cord, and imagination. One child became the merchant. Another the noble lady. Another the priest. Another the donkey. Laughter erupted until an adult shouted for silence. Even pretend worlds required cleanup afterward. In multi-generational homes, girls and boys watched many versions of adulthood. A patient aunt. A bitter uncle. A generous grandfather. A sharp-tongued grandmother. A hard-working cousin. A lazy relative everyone tolerated somehow. Children learned that adulthood was not one shape. This could be comforting. It could also be confusing. If father says sternness is strength, why is grandfather gentle and respected? If mother says marriage brings peace, why does aunt cry some nights? If uncle wastes coin and still eats here, what are rules truly for? Children often notice contradictions long before they can discuss them. Festivals in large households could feel grand even without wealth. Many hands preparing food. Floors swept carefully. Clothing shaken clean. Lamps trimmed. Offerings arranged. Faces washed and oiled. Voices brighter. Neighbors visiting in streams. Children loved these days because adults sometimes transformed. The stern father laughed. The worried mother sang. The strict grandmother told jokes from youth. The uncle who usually complained danced badly. A child seeing such changes may have wondered why joy could not stay longer. But joy, like flood water, comes and goes. As children approached adolescence, crowded homes offered less privacy exactly when privacy became more desired. A girl wanting quiet thoughts found sisters beside her always. A boy wanting solitude met cousins everywhere. Secret hopes had to live inwardly. Letters hidden in sandals. Tokens buried in jars. Meetings arranged at water paths. Dreams spoken only on rooftops at night. Constraint often teaches creativity. Older children in such homes also became caregivers by default. A 12-year-old girl rocking infants while grinding grain with one hand. A boy watching 3 younger cousins near the lane while trying to repair a basket. their own childhood blended with responsibility until the border blurred. Sometimes they resented it. Sometimes they felt proud. Often both at once. When elders died, the whole house changed shape. A sleeping place empty. A voice missing from mornings. A bowl unused. Certain stories no longer told correctly. Children learned that one person can be architecture. Grief in crowded homes was public and practical. Tears, visitors, rituals, rearranged tasks, redistributed duties. Life continued because it had to, but with a different sound. New elders slowly emerged. An aunt giving orders now. A once young cousin managing stores. A shy son speaking for the family in market disputes. Children watched these transitions carefully. They were seeing time at work. At night, when everyone settled, there might be little floor left uncovered by mats. Bodies lay in careful patterns learned through repetition. Someone coughed. Someone muttered in sleep. A child's foot crossed into another's blanket. The room smelled of dust, oil, warm skin, linen, and faint bread. Outside, stars shone over roofs packed close together. Somewhere a dog barked once. Somewhere an infant began crying and was soothed. Somewhere laughter still lingered in another courtyard. A child lying awake in such a house might crave space. The same child, years later in a quieter place, might crave those sounds again. That too is ancient. We long for what burdened us once it is gone. Before sleep fully came, many children likely listened to the breathing of family around them and felt two truths together. I am constrained here. I am held here. By dawn, the house would wake as one living creature. Doors opening. Ash stirred. Water poured. Orders given. Tasks resumed. Another day of rules shared among many hands. But for this moment in the dark, under one crowded roof beside the Nile, everyone simply rested together. There were children who belonged not to fields or family workshops, but to roads. Not always as wanderers without roots, though some were that too. Many belonged to movement because their parents traded, ferried goods, carried messages, hired themselves seasonally, or followed work where it could be found. Their homes were temporary courtyards, rented corners, boat decks, relative spare rooms, market shelters, or modest houses rarely occupied long enough to feel permanent. These children learned a different set of rules. Pack lightly. Do not lose the rope. Stay close in crowded places. Sleep where told. Trust slowly. Move when it is time. Where village children knew every doorway and every barking dog, road children knew changing skies, strange accents, and the weight of bundles tied before sunrise. A merchant's child might wake to the smell of leather straps and dates packed for travel. Donkeys stamped in dim light. Wheels creaked. Adults counted jars twice. Cloth was wrapped around goods against dust. Coins hidden carefully in belts or stitched seams. Children were expected to help, even half asleep. Hold this. Fetch that. Count again. Watch the animal. Do not wander. Road families could not afford lost time at departure. Once traveling, the day unfolded slowly across open land. Desert edges stretched pale and wide. Heat shimmered above distant ground. Sparse shrubs cast small shadows hardly worth naming. Sand clung to sandals and found every fold of cloth. Yet there was beauty too. Morning air cool on the face. The long silence between settlements. Birds crossing emptiness. The sound of bells tied to animals. Clouds rare enough to matter. Children on such roads often grew observant. With little entertainment but landscape, they noticed shapes of hills, tracks in dust, signs of water, weather sense, and moods of adults. They knew when father worried because he checked straps too often. They knew when mother sensed danger because she hurried them closer. They knew when trade had gone well because evening voices became generous. They knew when coin was short because meals grew simpler. Movement did not remove rules. It multiplied them. Do not speak prices aloud. Do not mention where money is hidden. Do not stare at armed men. Do not drink from unknown water. Do not boast of family goods. Do not lag behind. Many road children matured early because mistakes could become serious quickly. At caravan stops or market towns, the world opened wide before them. Foreign traders with different clothing. New foods. Strange pottery styles. Songs in unfamiliar rhythms. Animals larger or finer than any back home. Temples with forms they had never seen. Rumors from north and south drifting like smoke. A child carrying baskets through such places might feel wonder and caution braided together. Everything was interesting. Everything could also be risky. Some children of the road became skilled talkers. They learned greetings in several tongues, flattering phrases, market humor, how to smile without surrendering advantage. Others became quiet watchers, reading faces and listening for intent. A ferryman's child knew water routes instead of desert paths. Dawn began with ropes wet in the hand, planks checked, hull patched, cargo balanced. The Nile could be highway, employer, teacher, and threat all at once. Boat children learned balance before comfort. How to step when wood shifts. How to tie knots fast. How to read current lines on the surface. How to duck swinging cargo. How to stay calm when wind rose suddenly. They also learned patience. Boats moved at the pace of river and wind, not youthful urgency. Hours passed with reeds sliding by, villages appearing then fading, fishermen lifting nets, birds lifting from marshes. Children stared at banks and imagined lives in each place. Do children there grind grain too? Is that boy happier than me? Would their mother be kinder? Does that town have sweeter dates? Travel often teaches comparison before wisdom. Some families moved for labor during major building seasons. Quarries, canals, storage works, temple repairs, royal projects, estate expansions. Parents hired themselves where wages or rations called. Children lived among temporary camps of workers. There the air held different sounds. Stones struck by tools. Commands shouted across distance. Carts groaning. Men coughing dust. Cooking fires in rows at dusk. Crowded laughter after long days. Children in camps learned toughness from atmosphere alone. Space was rougher. Tempers shorter. Friendships faster. Privacy almost none. Yet they also learned solidarity. Workers shared tools, recipes, remedies, gossip, and grief because hard labor encourages mutual need. A child might be fed by 3 unrelated households in 1 week. A stranger might scold them like kin. Community can form quickly where burdens are shared. Children of soldiers or guards knew another rhythm still. Absence. A parent gone for months. Stories arriving before the person did. A return marked by gifts, scars, new habits, or silence. Such children often learn to love someone partly through memory and reputation. Your father is brave. Your mother keeps watch at the fort. They earn for us. They will return soon. Soon can be a very long word in childhood. When the absent parent returned, joy could mix with awkwardness. The child had grown. The parent had changed. Household rules shifted temporarily around the returned authority. Gifts might be brought: beads, a carved toy, unusual bread, foreign cloth scraps, stories of distant lands. Then one day they left again. Some children became experts in greeting and parting. Even settled families experienced movement through pilgrimage, temple festivals, marriage journeys, funerals, or seasonal visits to kin. For a child who rarely left the village, even a day's journey felt vast. The road before sunrise. Packed bread wrapped in cloth. Adults in better garments than usual. Excitement hidden under instructions. Stay close. Hold your sister's hand. Do not step in dung. We are already late. Journeys exposed children to the scale of the world. More houses than imagined. Larger markets. Wider river stretches. Richer homes. Poorer camps. Temples whose columns made them feel ant-sized. Tombs cut into stone. Foreign merchants with skin, hair, and speech unlike those at home. Such sights could widen a child inwardly. If the world is bigger than I thought, perhaps my future is too. Of course, many futures remained narrow despite widened imagination. Yet imagination itself matters. It gives the spirit a place to stretch when the body cannot. Road children often lacked the security of routine but gained adaptability. They could sleep through noise, eat unfamiliar food without complaint, make friends quickly, and sense danger in changing environments. Village children might envy their stories. Road children might envy village certainty. Every childhood imagines another easier than its own. At night on journeys, camps glowed softly under stars. Animals tethered nearby shifted and snorted. Fires crackled low. Pots simmered. Adults discussed routes, prices, weather, rumors, theft, taxes, illnesses, births, politics far above their station, and who could be trusted tomorrow. Children half asleep listened to adult truth loosened by darkness. He cheated us. That official takes too much. The road east is unsafe. My feet cannot do another week. If this trade fails, we are finished. Do not tell the others yet. Such overheard words could age a child quietly. Yet camps also held songs. Someone always knew a tune. Someone beat rhythm on a bowl or crate. Someone told a ridiculous story. Someone laughed too loudly. Human beings make hearth from almost nothing. A child wrapped in cloak or blanket, staring at stars beyond the fire smoke, may have felt both vulnerable and alive in a way walls never offer. No roof. No familiar room. No certainty. But endless sky. Back in settled towns, children sometimes listened with envy to travelers in markets. I saw temples north of here taller than palms. I crossed water so wide birds rested halfway. I traded with men whose language sounded like pebbles. I saw a city where streets never emptied. Children carried such tales home like smuggled treasure. Then dawn came, as dawn always does. Bundles retied. Ash scattered. Animals loaded. Bread eaten standing. Children shaken awake. Up now. We move. Whether on road, river, or within the same old lane, childhood in that world rarely lingered in softness for long. Yet movement taught some children a hidden lesson. Rules change from place to place. What one village forbids, another ignores. What one father demands, another laughs at. What one market values, another rejects. For a young mind, This discovery is powerful. It means not everything is eternal. Not every command is the shape of the universe. Some are simply customs carried by tired people. And under the endless sky of Egypt, with sandals dusty and eyes half closed from sleep, a child walking beside loaded animals may have felt the first quiet stirrings of freedom without yet knowing its name. There were children whose world centered not on roads or markets, but on the great houses of others. They were born into service, entered service through debt, were placed there by struggling kin, or came as young helpers to homes wealthier than their own. Their days unfolded beneath polished furniture they did not own, in courtyards they did not inherit, among food they prepared but did not choose. These children learned a refined kind of obedience. Walk quietly. Answer quickly. See everything. Be noticed only when needed. Remember who prefers what. Do not repeat what you hear. A servant child might rise before the household itself. The sky still dark. Lamps dim. The air cool enough to feel kind. Before masters stirred, floors were swept, water jars checked, coals revived, sandals arranged, shutters opened to first light. The child moved through rooms where others still slept. Linen curtains barely stirred. Perfumed oil lingered faintly. Carved chests stood closed. Bowls waited to be filled. Silence itself felt expensive. In poorer homes, mornings began loudly and all at once. In great houses, morning often began in layers. First the servants. Then the children of the house. Then the adults, once the day had already been prepared for them. A servant child learned hierarchy through footsteps alone. The heavy stride of a steward. The quick pace of a cook. The measured walk of a mistress. The impatient heel of a young master. The shuffle of an elder relative. They knew whom to greet first, whom to avoid when angry, whom to approach with requests, whom never to interrupt. Such knowledge could matter more than strength. A girl serving in women's quarters might help with clothing, braiding hair, carrying cosmetics, folding linen, rocking infants, cleaning lamps, fetching water, running messages through the house. She learned tastes, secrets, tensions, and the weather of moods. This one wanted silence in the morning. That one liked stories while being dressed. One sister cried often. Another complained always. An older aunt remembered every slight. The child learned diplomacy before adolescence. A boy in storerooms or outer courtyards might carry baskets, polish vessels, tend animals, accompany errands, assist cooks, run to markets, stack jars, clean tools, open gates, and stand ready for tasks no one announced until the moment they were needed. Readiness became habit. The great houses could appear comfortable, but comfort requires maintenance hidden from those enjoying it. Water still had to be carried. Grain still ground. Dust still returned each day. Lamps needed oil. Laundry needed hands. Infants cried regardless of wealth. Children in service learned that luxury often rests on invisible labor. Sometimes resentment grew there. Why do they sleep while I wake? Why does their child throw bread I would treasure? Why must I bow to someone younger than me? These questions likely lived quietly in many hearts. Yet admiration could live beside resentment. A servant child might marvel at painted walls, fine jewelry, soft cushions, imported wood, fragrant oils, smooth writing tablets, or educated speech. They saw possibilities beyond their birth, even if barred from them. Some dreamed of rising through loyalty or skill. Some simply dreamed of owning one comfortable chair. The children of wealthy homes and servant children often grew near in strange ways. Raised under one roof, they played together when very young, quarreled, shared jokes, imitated adults, and learned each other's habits. Then age clarified status. One child gave orders. The other received them. This shift could wound both. A young mistress told to command might feel awkward, then accustomed. A servant girl once treated as playmate might learn to bow to the same friend. Childhood friendship can be bent sharply by adult structure. Still, kindness sometimes survived. A rich child sharing sweets secretly. A servant boy taking blame for broken toys. A household daughter slipping worn but fine linen to her attendant. An older servant shielding younger ones from harsh tempers. Systems may define roles, but people still improvise humanity inside them. Meals in great houses displayed rank clearly. Owners and honored guests ate first, best, and most comfortably. Servants served, waited, watched levels in bowls and cups, anticipated needs, removed dishes, and later ate separately from what remained or what had been allotted. A child carrying platters through fragrant rooms smelled roasted meats, herbs, fresh bread, honey, beer, wine, sweet cakes. Hunger sharpened the senses cruelly. Do not stare. Do not lick your lips. Stand straight. When finally eating later in service quarters, simple food could taste wonderful from sheer relief. Children in service also learned secrecy. Houses held quarrels, affairs, debts, illnesses, ambitions, insults, fears, private prayers, and public masks. Servants heard much. A wise child learned quickly, hearing is safer than speaking. What was said at table stayed at table. What was whispered behind curtains stayed there. What was found misplaced might be returned silently. Loose tongues could lose places. Yet service households could also educate indirectly. A child dusting near a tutor heard lessons meant for another. A boy carrying tablets saw accounts and symbols repeatedly. A girl assisting with letters learned names and phrases by memory. Exposure itself teaches. Some likely learned to read in fragments no one intended. Some learned manners that later helped them marry upward or secure better work. Some learned bitterness. Some learned ambition. No single outcome belonged to all. The pace of large households could be relentless during festivals. Guests arriving. Floors scrubbed twice. Garlands hung. Extra bread baked. Wine jars opened. Musicians expected. Lamps multiplied. Children in service ran until legs trembled. Faster. More cups. Take this tray. Find the steward. Where is the oil? Clean that spill now. Meanwhile, laughter echoed from rooms they only crossed. Festivals can feel different depending on which side of the tray you carry. Yet after guests left, servants often enjoyed leftovers, stories, and exhausted laughter of their own. Shoes came off. Formal voices dropped. Mimicry of pompous guests began. Someone danced badly with a broom. Someone stole one last sweet. Joy has many back doors. Punishment in service homes varied widely. Some masters were fair, some cruel, most mixed according to mood and circumstance. Children feared sudden blame for things beyond their control. A broken cup no one saw break. A message never delivered because another servant forgot. A garment stained by someone else. A missing coin. The innocent are often vulnerable where power is unequal. Thus servant children became careful not only with objects, but with proximity. Do not stand nearest trouble. Yet they also became competent. Many could manage tasks richer children never learned. How to light fires in wind. How to calm a frightened donkey. How to stretch leftovers. How to soothe babies. How to clean stains. How to judge spoiled food. How to navigate adult anger. Practical wisdom often grows fastest at the bottom. Night in servant quarters was usually simpler than the main house. Fewer decorations. Rougher mats. Shared spaces. Laughter less polished. Complaints more honest. Bodies tired enough to sleep quickly. Children there heard truths spoken plainly. They think bread appears by magic. If he shouts one more time, let him polish his own sandals. The mistress cries when no one sees. The eldest daughter is kinder than her mother. Save coin when you can. Never trust promises without witnesses. Such lessons formed another education, one absent from formal scrolls. Some servant children eventually left to marry, to work elsewhere, to return to kin with skills and stories. Some stayed for life, becoming fixtures of the household, then elders within it. They would one day instruct new children in the same halls. Carry that properly. Listen the first time. Do not repeat what you hear. History often moves in circles small enough to fit inside a courtyard. Late at night, when great houses finally quieted, a servant child might slip outside for one moment alone. The stars above did not distinguish between roof and hut. Moonlight touched rich walls and poor sandals equally. The Nile somewhere beyond the city made the same old sounds. The child breathed cool air and felt, perhaps, a private self larger than any role assigned indoors. Then a voice from within. Where are you? Come back. And so they did. Morning would arrive soon. Lamps to trim. Floors to sweep. Orders to remember. Another day learning rules inside another family's comfort. Yet somewhere beneath obedience, many kept a small hidden place no command could fully enter. There were mornings when even the river seemed still, as if the whole world had paused between one breath and the next. Mist lay low over the Nile, soft enough to blur the far banks. Birds moved through it without urgency, appearing and disappearing like thoughts half remembered. The water carried no noise at first, only a slow, patient glide beneath the pale sky. In those early hours, Egypt felt less like a place and more like a quiet rhythm. Children woke into that silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence before instruction begins again. Inside homes, the first sounds returned gently. A hand sliding across a clay jar. A door lifted from its wooden peg. Ash stirred back into life. Water poured into bowls. Someone coughed softly, as if not to disturb the morning itself. Children lay still for a moment longer, listening. Because even they knew what was coming. The day always arrived with shape. Sit up. Wash. Carry. Begin. In villages along the river, mist mornings meant damp ground and cooler air. Feet left faint marks in soft soil. Sandals felt heavier from moisture. The smell of wet earth rose up into houses, mixing with smoke from small fires trying to wake. A child stepping outside might feel the world unusually gentle at first touch. Then work would remind them otherwise. Goats needed tending. Grain needed turning. Water needed fetching. Tools needed cleaning from yesterday. The household did not move quickly, but it moved without pause. Even stillness had tasks. A girl might be sent to check store jars, lifting lids carefully to ensure nothing had spoiled overnight. A boy might be asked to gather fallen wood along the lane before others claimed it. Younger children might sweep courtyards still damp from night air, making neat patterns in the dust. Everything was small, repetitive, necessary. And in repetition, children learned endurance. In richer homes, mist mornings revealed courtyards washed and arranged even before waking. Servants had already moved through rooms in darkness, preparing order for those who would never see the preparation itself. Fresh water placed. Floors swept. Cloth folded. Shoes aligned. Lamps cleaned. Breakfast arranged. When the household rose, it rose into readiness already made. Children born into such homes sometimes believed that order simply existed, like the sky or the river. Only those who worked beneath them knew how fragile order truly was. In poorer homes, the same mist mornings meant earlier strain. Smoke from cooking fires sometimes refused to rise properly in damp air. Bread took longer to bake. Animals were slower to move. Children had to wait for warmth that came late. Patience was not taught. It was demanded. As the sun began to break through, everything changed color. The mist thinned. The river brightened. Mud walls turned from gray to gold. Palm leaves began to shine. Shadows sharpened into shape. And with light came urgency. The Nile Valley was a place where time belonged to the sun more than to people. When it rose, work followed. When it set, work softened. Children learned this without being told. There were always exceptions, of course. Sick days, festival days, rare quiet days when labor eased for a moment. But even those carried expectation. Rest was not empty. Rest prepared the body for more work. Children carried that understanding early in life. Even play had structure. Even laughter had limits. A group of children might chase each other through lanes, kicking up dust, hiding behind storage jars, pretending to be traders or soldiers or priests. Their voices would rise freely until an adult appeared at a doorway. Then suddenly, they remembered themselves. A shift in posture. A lowering of sound. A quick return to tasks. The transformation was almost automatic. In that world, adults were not only caregivers. They were the boundary between freedom and consequence. A glance could end a game. A word could redirect a morning. A silence could signal disappointment more clearly than shouting. Children became skilled at reading those signals. In fields, the rhythm was different but just as steady. Irrigation channels guided water carefully through soil. Hands broke earth, placed seeds, covered them again. Oxen moved in slow circles under patient guidance. Sunlight grew stronger as hours passed. The work was not dramatic. It was continuous. A child working beside adults learned to match that continuity. There was no final moment of completion that felt like victory. Only gradual progress measured in rows, baskets, and aching muscles. Breaks came briefly. A sip of water. A piece of bread. A moment of shade. Then back again. Yet within that repetition, children sometimes found a strange calm. The mind, once adjusted, could drift while the body continued. Eyes watched the work. Thoughts moved elsewhere. To the river. To home. To stories. To questions that had no urgent answers. Why does grain grow this way? Why do some families have more land? Why do elders decide everything? Why does tiredness feel so permanent? Such thoughts rarely disrupted work. They moved alongside it quietly, like water under reeds. At midday, heat pressed down again. The land narrowed into survival. Shade became precious. Voices shortened. Movement slowed. Children learned to conserve strength without being told. Walk less. Speak less. Waste nothing. Even breath felt like effort. And yet, life continued in small necessary motions. A woman adjusting a child's cloth. A man tightening a rope. A boy wiping sweat from his eyes. A girl refilling a jar. Each action small, each one essential. In towns, scribes worked in shaded rooms where ink and papyrus created a different kind of endurance. Their world was not heat and soil, but memory and precision. A missed mark could change meaning. A forgotten number could change grain stores. A poorly written name could dishonor someone across generations. Children learning under them discovered that stillness can also be labor. Sit. Watch. Repeat. Correct. Again. The reed pen moved slowly, but the expectation did not. Mistakes were not ignored. They were rewritten until disappearance. For many children, writing became a path that seemed to lift them slightly above physical labor, even as it introduced a new kind of pressure. The body sat, but the mind strained constantly to hold form. Outside those rooms, life remained physical. Boats crossed the river, oars dipping in steady rhythm. Merchants called out prices. Animals pulled loads. Workers repaired walls. Children ran errands. Everything moved, even when it seemed slow. As afternoon softened into evening, exhaustion settled into bones. The day's heat released its grip gradually. Long shadows stretched across lanes. The smell of cooking returned. Smoke curled upward in familiar patterns. Children returning from work often felt the weight of the entire day in their shoulders. But home meant transition. Tools set aside. Sandals removed. Dust brushed off. Water poured over hands and feet. The body, still tired, was no longer required to perform. Evening meals were quieter than midday work but warmer in feeling. Bread shared more slowly. Stories exchanged more easily. Children sometimes spoke of small victories that mattered deeply to them. I carried it without spilling. I finished before others. I was not shouted at today. I remembered everything. These were not grand achievements. But in lives built on instruction, small success carried real meaning. After eating, the world softened again. Courtyards filled with low conversation. Lamps were lit. The river darkened into a smooth ribbon beyond the houses. Frogs and insects returned. The sky deepened into blue, then black. Children lay down once more beneath linen cloths or woven mats. Their bodies heavy, their minds still slightly awake with fragments of the day. Faces of adults. Sounds of commands. Heat of sun. Smell of bread. Feel of water. And somewhere beneath all of it, a quiet awareness forming slowly over years, that life was made of rules repeated until they became invisible, and that growing up meant learning to move inside those rules without breaking too easily. Outside, the Nile continued its endless path through darkness, unchanged by labor or memory. Inside, children drifted into sleep again, carried forward by the same rhythm that would greet them in the morning, and the morning after that, and the one after that, as long as the river kept flowing beside the land that shaped their lives. There were nights when the air stayed warm long after the sun was gone, as if the day had refused to fully leave. Walls held onto heat. Roofs gave it back slowly. Even sleep came with a sense of lingering weight, like the world had not yet cooled enough to settle completely. Children lay still in that half-warm darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of the night. A distant boat shifting against its rope. Water brushing reeds. A dog moving between courtyards. A soft voice somewhere, calling once, and then stopping. The Nile never truly fell silent. It only changed its language after sunset. Inside homes, lamps burned low. Their light did not fill rooms so much as soften them. Shadows gathered in corners where baskets and tools rested after a day's use. The smell of smoke, oil, and warm clay mixed with the scent of bodies finally at rest. Children learned to recognize the difference between night silence and daytime silence. Day silence waited for commands. Night silence released them. Yet even in that release, rules remained close. Doors still needed securing. Animals still needed checking. Water still needed covering. Fires still needed watching until they died properly. Responsibility did not sleep, it only slowed. Older children sometimes stayed awake longer than younger ones, not by choice but by habit. They helped finish last tasks, guided younger siblings to mats, or sat near elders who spoke in quiet, tired voices. A grandmother might adjust a child's blanket without looking. A father might sit outside the doorway for a long time, staring at nothing. A mother might count jars again in her mind before sleep. These were not dramatic moments. They were the texture of endurance. Children lying nearby absorbed it all. In the river villages, nights carried a coolness that made the Nile feel even closer. The water reflected starlight so clearly it seemed doubled. The boundary between sky and river became uncertain in the dark. For a child waking briefly, it might have felt like the world had turned upside down in sleep. Some nights brought wind. It moved through palm leaves with a sound like soft paper being turned. It brushed across rooftops and stirred sleeping mats slightly. It carried distant smells from fields, smoke, and water. Wind meant different things depending on age. To adults, it meant weather, crops, boats, planning. To children, it simply meant movement they did not have to respond to. There were households where storytelling stretched late into the night. Not always for entertainment alone, but for teaching, memory, comfort, or passing time after exhausting days. Stories of clever servants. Stories of patient farmers. Stories of foolish pride punished by fate. Stories of gods walking among people in disguise. Stories of floods that changed lives. Stories of journeys that should not have succeeded but did. Children listened with half-closed eyes, holding on to fragments more than full meaning. A clever child survives. The river gives and takes. Do not boast too early. Be kind to strangers. Obey the gods. Wait for time. These lessons settled slowly, not as instruction, but as atmosphere. In wealthier homes, night could be quieter but more structured. Lamps extinguished at precise times. Doors checked in sequence. Servants moving through final routines with practiced efficiency. Even rest had order built into it. In poorer homes, night was less structured but equally careful. Fewer objects to manage, fewer rooms to check, yet still the same awareness of vulnerability. Sleep was never fully separate from readiness. Children in both worlds learned that night is not absence of life, but a different kind of life. A quieter one. A slower one. A more inward one. Sometimes, in that inward space, children thought about the day in ways they could not during action. A harsh word replayed. A small kindness remembered. A mistake that might bring tomorrow's correction. A moment of laughter that surprised them. The mind reorganized everything at night, placing meaning on events that had passed too quickly to understand earlier. This is how childhood builds memory. Not all at once, but in layers of quiet reflection between sleep and waking. There were also nights of fear. A sick child breathing unevenly. A storm rolling in from desert edges. A sudden cry in another house. A rumor of theft or danger. A fever that did not break. In such moments, the household became alert in a different way. Lamps might be relit. Water fetched. Cloth soaked and wrung. Whispered prayers offered. Adults moving faster than usual, but carefully. Children watching from mats learned that calm is not permanent. It is maintained. And sometimes rebuilt in the middle of darkness. When danger passed, exhaustion returned twice as heavy. Morning after such nights often felt like recovery rather than beginning. Still, the river always brought morning. Light returned gradually, touching palm tops first, then rooftops, then the dusty lanes between homes. The Nile shifted from black to deep blue to silver again. Birds began before people. Sound returned in layers. And with it, the familiar structure of life. Rise. Wash. Prepare. Work. Children stood again in the rhythm they knew so well it no longer felt like instruction, only reality. Over time, without anyone marking the moment, children noticed their own growth not in age alone, but in responsibility. Tasks that once felt large became routine. Carrying heavier loads. Walking longer distances. Remembering more instructions. Caring for younger siblings. Correcting others in small ways. Being trusted with more. This change rarely came with ceremony. It arrived gradually, like the rising of the river in flood season. Quiet. Certain. Unstoppable. Some children welcomed it. Responsibility meant importance. Importance meant visibility. Visibility meant recognition. Others resisted it inwardly, missing the simplicity of being told exactly what to do without being held accountable for others. Most lived somewhere between those feelings. In ancient households, growing up did not separate sharply from childhood. It blended, step by step, until one day a child realized they were already being treated as someone almost adult. Not asked where they were going. Not corrected as often. Not followed as closely. Given tasks without supervision. Expected to understand consequences. And that realization often came quietly. Not as an announcement, but as an absence of instruction. One morning, no one says do this carefully because it is assumed you already know. That is when childhood begins to fade. Yet even as rules increased, so did moments of trust and independence. A young person sent alone to market. A girl asked to manage bread preparation entirely. A boy left in charge of animals for a day. A teenager spoken to as an equal by certain adults. These were small openings in a structured world. Through them, children glimpsed adulthood not as freedom, but as expanded responsibility. As years passed, memories of early childhood softened. The strictness of rules remained, but the emotional weight changed. What once felt like constant correction began to feel like shared language. Everyone here knows how to work. Everyone here understands the river. Everyone here follows the rhythm. Even hardship, when lived long enough, becomes familiar enough to feel like home. And yet, beneath familiarity, something quieter always remained. A question unspoken but never gone. Is there a life beyond this rhythm? Some answered it through acceptance. Some through ambition. Some through leaving. Some never answered it at all. But every child, somewhere in the quiet hours between dusk and sleep, likely felt its shape. Outside, the Nile continued its ancient movement, carrying reflections of stars, villages, and time itself. Inside, the world of rules, work, family, and learning settled again into night. And another generation drifted forward, one morning at a time, inside the long and steady current of life along the river. There were seasons when the air felt softer, almost forgiving, as if the land itself had grown less harsh for a brief time. After harvest, when grain was safely stored and fields lay quiet for a while, the pressure of constant labor eased just slightly. Not fully. Never fully. But enough that the rhythm of days changed its tone. Children noticed it first in small ways. A task delayed until later. A voice less sharp than usual. An afternoon that stretched without urgency. A moment when someone simply said, "Rest for a little." In those weeks, life did not stop. It simply loosened. Homes still woke early, but there was less rush in movement. Work still existed, but it felt more measured. Even the river seemed to reflect that calm, flowing steadily without the urgency of flood or drought. Children often filled this space with play that lasted longer than usual. Games carried into mid-morning instead of ending quickly. Laughter echoed farther down lanes. Small groups gathered under shade trees, inventing stories, mimicking adults, building imaginary households where roles could be changed at will. One child became the baker. Another the merchant. Another the overseer who was easily tricked. Another the traveler returning from distant lands. In play, children briefly rearranged the strict world they lived in. But even play reflected reality. There were rules. There were leaders. There were disagreements about fairness. There were moments of exclusion and reconciliation. Even imagination carried the shape of the world that formed it. Adults watched these games with mixed attention. Sometimes amused. Sometimes too tired to interfere. Sometimes quietly observing, seeing reflections of labor and hierarchy in miniature form. A child pretending to give orders was not just playing. A child refusing to obey in play was not just resisting. These were rehearsals of life, whether anyone intended them to be or not. During quieter seasons, elders often became more present in daily life. Not because they suddenly had more energy, but because the pace of work allowed them space to sit, watch, and speak. They might sit near doorways in the morning light, hands resting on walking sticks, observing everything without urgency. Children passing by learned to greet them properly. Not because the greeting mattered in itself, but because acknowledgement maintained order. An elder might call a child closer for no obvious reason. Adjust their clothing. Comment on posture. Recall a memory from decades earlier. In those moments, time felt layered. A child standing there was also being compared to someone long gone. You remind me of your uncle at that age. Your mother was quicker than you. This land was different then. Through such remarks, children began to understand that life did not begin with them, and would not end with them. The river made that lesson easier to feel. It moved constantly, unchanged in essence, while generations lived and disappeared along its banks. There were also moments when work returned sharply after rest, as if the land itself corrected too much softness. Preparation for planting, repair after storms, cleaning of storage spaces, renewed attention to animals, maintenance of canals. And once again, children were folded back into structure. Wake earlier. Move faster. Remember everything. Do not delay. The return of intensity always felt sudden, even if expected. This was the nature of life in cycles. Rest arrived slowly. Work returned quickly. In villages, social life continued to shape children in subtle ways. Visits between households created networks of observation and comparison. A child who visited another home noticed differences immediately. More food. Less food. Stricter rules. Louder laughter. Cleaner floors. Tighter spaces. Kinder adults. Harsher voices. From these comparisons, children formed early ideas about fairness, even if no one explicitly taught them such concepts. Why does that house have more grain? Why does that child speak more freely? Why is my cousin allowed that and I am not? Adults rarely answered such questions fully. Sometimes they could not. Sometimes they would not. Sometimes the answer was simply circumstance, which is difficult for a child to accept. So children created their own explanations. Some believed effort determined everything. Some believed fate decided all. Some believed kindness brought reward. Some believed power simply chose its owners. These beliefs shifted as they grew and experienced contradictions. In time, certainty softened into understanding that life rarely follows one rule. As adolescence approached, children's roles expanded again. Not only in labor, but in awareness. They began to be included in conversations once reserved for adults. Talk of marriage arrangements. Talk of debts and obligations. Talk of neighbors' reputations. Talk of distant political events that filtered slowly into local life. A young person standing nearby might hear their own future discussed as if it were a shared household decision rather than a personal journey. That experience could feel strange at first. Then normal. Then unavoidable. In wealthier homes, this transition was often more formalized. In poorer homes, more practical. But in both, it marked a shift from being guided to being included in the structure of decision-making, even without full voice. Some children accepted this easily. Others held on to earlier simplicity for as long as they could. There were also moments of quiet reflection that came unexpectedly. A child sitting alone after work, watching river light change. A teenager walking home at dusk, noticing how familiar everything had become. A brief awareness that the world they once thought large now felt mapped, known, routine. That realization could bring comfort or restlessness, depending on the person. In many households, nighttime became the only space where such thoughts could breathe. After work, after meals, after duties, when voices lowered and movement slowed. Children lying on mats might stare into dim roof beams, listening to night sounds outside. Water. Wind. Distant footsteps. Occasional laughter. Occasional silence deeper than sound. Thoughts drifted more freely at that hour. About the day. About the future. About what kind of adult they might become. Not in dramatic visions, but in practical imagining. Will I work the same fields? Will I leave this place? Will I manage a household? Will I ever rest without thinking of work? Such questions did not require answers to remain present. They simply accompanied growing up. And somewhere in that quiet thinking, children began to understand something slowly and without instruction. That life in this world was not built around personal happiness alone, but around continuity. Families continuing. Fields continuing. Work continuing. Rivers continuing. Rules continuing. Each generation stepping into patterns already formed, adjusting them slightly, then passing them forward again. Yet within that continuity, small variations existed. A kinder adult here. A more patient teacher there. A more generous neighbor. A more careful child. A different decision in a marriage. A different path taken by a son or daughter who chose to leave. These small differences accumulated quietly over time, shaping lives in ways no single person could fully see. By the time night deepened completely and most households fell into sleep, the river outside remained the same steady presence it had always been. Flowing. Reflecting. Carrying. Holding. And within that steady movement, children who had grown through rules, labor, warmth, scarcity, and routine rested for a moment from all of it. Not free from it. Not outside it. But held within it, as naturally as the land itself. And sleep, soft and unavoidable, carried them forward into another morning that would look much like the last, and yet never be exactly the same. There were mornings when the sky arrived without color at first, only a quiet gray stretching over the river like a thin cloth. Everything felt undecided in those moments. Not yet day, not still night. The world paused in between, holding its breath. Children waking into that in-between often stayed still for longer than usual. Listening. Waiting. As if the day itself had not yet given permission to begin. Then somewhere in the house, a sound would break the stillness. A jar moved. A fire stirred. A voice cleared softly. A door opened. And the world returned to its familiar shape. Work did not arrive all at once. It unfolded. One task becoming another. One instruction leading to the next. A chain that carried the household forward without needing to be seen. Children learned this chain early. Even before they understood time, they understood sequence. After washing comes carrying. After carrying comes eating. After eating comes work. After work comes evening. After evening comes sleep. And then again. In villages along the Nile, early morning light revealed small details that were invisible at night. Cracks in mud walls. Footprints softened by dust. Tools left against doorways. Smoke stains above cooking spaces. Water jars beaded with condensation. Children noticed these things without being asked. They learned that the world resets itself each night, but never fully erases what came before. A broken jar remained broken. A repaired wall still showed its repair. A harsh word still lingered in memory. A kindness stayed longer than expected. As the sun rose higher, sounds increased. Not loud all at once, but layered. A goat calling. A grinder turning. A child laughing briefly before being called back. A neighbor greeting another. A hammer striking wood. A rhythm forming across the settlement. Workplaces in different parts of the village began to awaken fully. Fields filled with movement. Workshops with smoke and dust. Riverbanks with boats preparing to move. Children were part of all of it, depending on their household. Some followed parents into fields. Some remained near homes assisting older relatives. Some moved between tasks carrying messages or goods. Some stayed in workshops learning slow skills that would shape their future. But all of them shared one thing. They were rarely stationary. Movement was part of learning. A child sitting still too long was often redirected, not out of impatience, but out of necessity. There is always something to do. This phrase lived quietly in most households, even when not spoken. In wealthier estates, movement was more organized. Tasks assigned, schedules clearer, roles more defined. A child serving in such a place might move between spaces with instructions in hand or memory. In poorer homes, movement was more flexible, sometimes chaotic, often overlapping. One child doing several things at once. One adult managing many responsibilities simultaneously. Plans adjusted constantly to need. Both worlds required adaptation. Children became experts in adjustment before they became experts in anything else. As days passed into weeks and weeks into seasons, certain patterns became so familiar that children stopped noticing them consciously. The timing of meals. The sound of certain footsteps. The order of daily tasks. The distance to the river. The behavior of animals in different weather. The moods of adults at different hours. These patterns became invisible knowledge. Not taught, but absorbed. This is how childhood builds understanding of the world it inhabits. Not through instruction alone, but through repetition until awareness becomes instinct. There were also moments when something disrupted the pattern. A visitor from another village. A sudden illness. A broken tool. A delayed flood cycle. A dispute between households. A marriage celebration. A death. These interruptions changed everything briefly, revealing how fragile routine really was. Children were often both observers and participants in such disruptions. They carried messages. They helped prepare food. They stayed out of the way. They listened. They watched adults behave differently under pressure or celebration. And they remembered. In many households, children were also the memory keepers of small things adults forgot in busyness. Where did you put that? Did you see my tool? Who last fed the animal? Did we pay that neighbor? This role gave them a quiet importance, even when they did not fully understand it. As children grew older, their understanding of time deepened. Not just daily time, but seasonal time. The slow rhythm of planting, growing, harvesting, resting, and preparing again. They began to see life not as separate days, but as repeating arcs. Flood season. Planting season. Growth season. Harvest season. Rest season. And then again. Within these arcs, childhood itself felt like a season that eventually passed into another without clear announcement. One day, tasks became heavier. One day, instructions became fewer. One day, silence from adults meant trust instead of oversight. One day, childhood was no longer the category they lived inside, even though their bodies still carried its memory. And yet, even as roles changed, something from early life remained. The memory of being guided closely. The memory of rules spoken clearly. The memory of correction, repetition, patience, fatigue. These memories shaped how they later guided others. Younger siblings. Apprentices. Children of their own. History in these households did not move in lines. It moved in layers passing through generations, each one carrying forward what it had once received. By afternoon, heat returned again as it always did. The river shimmered in stronger light. Shadows shortened. Movement slowed slightly under the weight of sun. Children adapted without thinking. Resting when possible. Working when required. Drinking when allowed. Continuing regardless. Even exhaustion became familiar enough not to feel surprising. In that familiarity, something subtle formed. A sense that life was not something that would ever stop and begin differently. It simply continued. Changing in small ways. Repeating in large ones. And as evening approached once again, the land softened. Voices lowered. Work slowed. Light turned golden along the river's surface. The sky prepared itself for night as it had done for countless days before. Children finishing their tasks felt the same quiet transition they had always known. Not relief exactly. Not freedom, but a return to stillness after motion. Inside homes, lamps would soon be lit again. Meals prepared again. Conversations held again. Sleep would arrive again. And somewhere within that repetition, children who had grown through all of it carried forward the same understanding without ever needing it spoken aloud. Life here was built from rules, but lived through endurance. And both, quietly, became something close to love, even when no one called it by that name. There were nights when everything finally seemed to loosen its grip. Not because the world changed, but because the body could no longer hold the weight of the day. Children lay down and felt the slow surrender of muscles that had carried, lifted, obeyed, followed, and repeated for so many hours. The linen beneath them was familiar. The air was familiar. The sounds outside were familiar. Even fatigue itself felt familiar, like an old companion that always returned. Somewhere beyond the walls, the Nile continued its quiet movement. Not rushing. Not resting. Simply continuing. Inside homes, lamps dimmed one by one. Voices faded into softer tones, then into silence. The last small tasks were completed almost without thought. A door adjusted. A jar covered. A child turned onto their side. A final breath of conversation in another room. Then stillness. The kind of stillness that does not demand attention, only acceptance. In that stillness, the years of growing up seemed to gather into one long, gentle stream. The early mornings when instruction came before awareness. The days of carrying, grinding, fetching, learning. The seasons of flood and harvest and waiting. The crowded rooms filled with voices and rules. The quiet moments of play and imagination that slipped between duties. The lessons repeated so often they became part of movement itself. Sit. Carry. Wait. Watch. Obey. Learn. Continue. None of it existed alone. It formed a pattern so constant that it stopped feeling like separate memories and became instead a single lived rhythm. And within that rhythm, children had grown without fully noticing the shape of their own becoming. Not in sudden transformation, but in slow accumulation. A heavier basket carried without complaint. A younger child guided without instruction. A task remembered without reminder. A voice once corrected now correcting others gently. A body that once waited for direction now understanding what must be done. This is how childhood ends in a world like this. Not with a moment, but with familiarity. Somewhere in the quiet of night, a child who is no longer quite a child might lie awake for a brief time longer than usual. Listening. Thinking without forming clear thoughts. Feeling the presence of everything that came before. The river outside does not explain itself. It simply flows. And in that flow, life is carried forward without pause, across generations that wake, work, rest, and wake again beneath the same sky, beside the same water, under the same long and steady order of days. There is no final ending to such a story. Only the soft continuation of people learning rules, learning labor, learning endurance, and somewhere inside all of it, learning how to exist gently within the shape of their world. And as sleep finally deepens, even that awareness fades, leaving only breath, darkness, and the quiet certainty that morning will come again in its own time, as it always has.